This beautiful story starts on the 4th of March, 1424. According to the Nars calendar, the mainland of Nars became the place where the Great Wage broke out. People in knightly armor fought with evil spirits. An army of demons and the living dead made its way into the lands, which were choked in a stream of raging flames, turning all living things into ashes. And no one could stop the army of the Demon King, which is why the world plunged into despair. A detachment of fighters appeared on the cliff in front of the army of evil spirits, among whom was a warrior ready to fight back. The name of the game, Paradiso, appeared on the monitor, along with a message urging players to join the battle right now. In this role-playing game, the hero confronts the Demon King, becomes a king, and leads his state forward. A knight wearing the crown of the Wise King and a knight's sword appeared on the screen. The main character sat in a computer chair wearing special glasses every evening after work, and all his free time he devoted to the game Paradiso, which brought him genuine joy. The character from the game was dressed in golden armor. The main character was a person who knew the game inside and out, including hero development, kingdom management, game bugs, dungeon runs, item detection, and much more. His forum blog, containing all the information about the game and game guides, was at the top for 10 years, but he could not continue blogging and simply rotted away. The guy was sitting in a computer chair, showing no signs of life. The cause of his death was overwork at work and in games. Thinking that at 34 he had never even dated anyone, and that his death was in vain, the protagonist opened his eyes. The fat young man jumped out of bed, trying to catch his breath while the shocked maid stood nearby. The girl, widening her eyes, asked worriedly whether His Majesty had a nightmare. The guy looked nervously to the side. There were many portraits hanging in the spacious room. Then he glanced at the other side of the room. The sun's rays through the huge windows illuminated the rich interior of the bedroom. Looking at the maid, the main character asked who she was and what kind of place this was. This question puzzled the girl. They looked at each other silently, not understanding what was happening. The sun illuminated the mansion. In one of the rooms there was silence. The guy was shocked when he saw his own reflection in the mirror. A status window popped up in front of him in which all the basic information about the character was collected. Having read that due to his high degree of obesity, his life expectancy had been reduced by 20 years. The young man put his hand to his forehead, realizing that with such indicators of experience, he was no better than ordinary trash. He sat down on a wooden chair, deciding to calm down first. In the reflection of the mirror was his body from a past life, and his name was Tappan, but the main character died from overwork and was reborn in the body of a fat king named Jared. Looking at the pop-up windows that showed the date, the name of the continent, Nyers, and the name of the kingdom, Cribia, the guy realized that he was in the Paradiso game, which had become a reality for him. Lowering his eyebrows nervously, he realized that this life would soon come to an end. Imagining the dead seizing the body of a man, the young man remembered that this year the Great War of the Host will begin, and in 5 years there will be a great drought and famine, a volcanic eruption, an earthquake, an epidemic, and the Great War of Nars will begin due to lack of food. Clutching his throat, he thought about what would happen to him, the king of this land, if a war broke out on Nars involving all the states, including Trivia, angrily waving his arms and legs. The main character was disappointed in his character, despite his extensive knowledge about Paradiso, because in novels about rebirth, the hero is always reborn in the image of a handsome guy who lives a beautiful life. When asked why he was reborn in the body of a fat man, the chair leg cracked. His body fell noisily to the floor. With his arms outstretched, he lay on the ruins of a chair. Remembering the character as he was as a child, Jared thought that he must have grown up to be very handsome. Leaning on one hand, the guy decided that he still had hope because weight can be lost very quickly. Trying to get up, the fat man realized that he had memories from his past life and decided that he could be content with all the blessings of this world since he was completely alone here. Standing up straight, he promised to secure a great future for himself with the help of knowledge and to get what others don't even know. About of breath, the main character stated that his goal was to become the strongest warrior on the mainland and a renowned king who would unite the whole world. The maid, humming some kind of melody, brushed dust from the bookshelves. Completely devoting herself to her work, she decided to tidy up well so that the king could use the office in cleanliness and comfort, despite the fact that he had not looked there for a long time. The noise frightened the girl. Jared opened the door and called her over. The maid, with a blush on her cheeks, turned to His Majesty. He was trying to find something in the desk drawer. What we were looking for was also not found under the table. The guy was rushing around the room looking for something important. The girl asked what exactly he was looking for, looking through the things in the chest. The fat man replied that his father left him something after his death, and obviously hid it somewhere. The maid opened the cabinet and took out an amulet from it, saying that it had been lying there all this time. The young man was surprised, because he had already searched everything. Taking the amulet from the maid's hands, he thanked her. The girl's eyes lit up. She said that she was always happy to help His Majesty and asked what else she needed to do. Jared smiled and asked her to leave for a while. The maid found herself behind a closed door. She shrugged her shoulders, holding the piped ester in her hands. Turning around, the girl noticed that the king was not the same today as usual. Clenching her fists joyfully, she declared that the king was too energetic. Running forward along the corridor, the maid decided to take his example and work harder. The guy sighed nervously. In his hands was an amulet, a relic of his father that Barrett had made, an artifact that promotes the growth of magic. Looking at the sparkling amulet, the young man was about to break it. The stone inside was cracked. Energy gushed out of him. The Fat King's only merit was the title of fourth-class magician. The amulet flew into the air, emitting blinding energy that the king would not have been able to summon with his magic. A black spot formed in the air. The decision to sacrifice the artifact was the only way to succeed. Looking into the abyss, the main character decided that his father would understand his desire to use all possible methods to become stronger. The room was enveloped in a dark haze. A demon emerged from it in the middle of the room. A crack has formed on the wall. The ceiling was destroyed. The demon asked what kind of stupid person summoned him. Jared looked at him, thinking that he could only be summoned once in a lifetime. The demon Isabella appeared before him, opening his mouth and asking who summoned her. After her question about what a person so badly wants to take possession of, the guy resolutely knitted his eyebrows, asking her to make him the best among the best. Looking at the demon with burning eyes and sharp claws, he decided that there was no need to be afraid and worry, because Isabella quickly loses interest in those who are afraid and loves free individuals. Keeping a determined look in his eyes, the king thought that there would be no second chance if he sent Isabella back right now. Looking at the demon, the young man declared that he wanted to receive a spiritual eye. Opening her fanged mouth wide, Isabella laughed, declaring that the desire to see through other people was very selfish. Without taking his eyes off her, the protagonist confirmed this, thinking that only one person in Paradiso could master the spiritual eye skill. Imagining people covered in red haze, he thought that the spiritual eye allows him to scan the indicators and character of another person. The detail of the information depends on the level and abilities of the user, and he needed this skill to manage the kingdom and find promising players. Raising his index finger, the demon agreed, asking for something in return. Bringing her face closer to Jared's, she asked what was most important to him because everything had to be paid for. A scroll appeared in front of the frightened guy's face. The demon immediately grabbed him. Opening the scroll, Isabella declared that she would give the spiritual eye in exchange for the most valuable thing for him. Raising the king above the demonic cycle, she said that she could take away his wealth and glory and turn him into a penniless slave, or she could feast on his precious family. With his eyes widened in shock, the guy realized that the demon was seeing his memories and reading his thoughts, which was the worst curse. The young man grinned slyly. Isabella pouted, not controlling herself and not understanding what was happening. Smiling, the main character said that all this time he kept in his head what was not particularly dear to him, because he knew in advance about the terms of the demonic deal. Putting his fingers to his temple, he said it was difficult to keep thinking about the same thing. Looking smugly at the demon, Jared explained that all this time he had been thinking about how he had kept his first kiss for 34 years. Trying to resist the force of the contract, Isabella dug her claws into the floor and said that it was incredibly stupid to think about her first kiss. Her head was right in front of the guy who was against the fact that his first kiss would be with a demon. His robe tore. He spread his arms, glorifying his country, and so an eternal contract was concluded with Isabella. Two maids walked along the corridors of the mansion. One of them said that the king had been acting strange lately because he had been in reclusion for several months and was now full of energy, despite the fact that before he was constantly overcome by laziness. The second maid replied that his face only became animated when he was eating. And the maid was running down the corridor, her blue hair bouncing as she ran. One of the girls wondered why the king went down to the basement that no one ever goes into. A maid with blue hair interrupted their conversation with a request to disperse and let her through. The black-haired girl asked if Hayes needed help, to which she, running forward along the corridor, shouted that she could handle it herself. The red-haired maid said that her colleague was too zealous. Despite the fact that she cries at night due to curses and beatings from the king, the second girl put her hand to her head and felt sorry for her friend. Hayes entered the office, holding a stack of books and papers in her hands, and said that she had brought all the documents for the kingdom and information about the family. The main character put his hand in front of him, asking the girl to stop and not come closer. Leaving her bewildered, he read her status window, surprised that she had many traits, including Seth's-level devotion. Jared frowned and wanted to make a healer out of a simple maid. He thought that unrequited love at level meant that the girl had been in love with someone for at least 10 years. The guy mentally apologized for being too busy and could not date her. Hayes asked worriedly what happened, why the king extended his hands and asked to give him the documents. He took the top few sheets. The maid looked at the king in confusion. When the fat man leaned on the table to read the documents, she suddenly asked for forgiveness. The guy asked what the apology was for. Looking down, the maid explained that every time something like this happened, she needed to work harder, The main character looked at her. Her trembling hand was pressed to her chest. He remembered how his character raised his hand to slap the girl. Sheets of paper were in the air. His character watched. As the maid collected the fallen documents, however, there was a smile on her face. The angry character moved away from her. Standing in front of Hayes, Jared remembered that the king very often entrusted most of the tasks to her and took out his anger on her if something did not work out. Thinking that he was a completely different person, the guy rose above the maid and called her by name. He waved his hand. The girl closed her eyes to take another blow, but the young man hugged her and asked for forgiveness. The maid pressed to his chest, stared in shock at the king, who asked for forgiveness for all the pain he had caused and thanked him for his trust. On the table lay a pile of papers and an inkwell with a feather. The fat man promised that from now on everything would be different and that he would no longer be so pathetic for the sake of becoming the most powerful king. The main character smiled and asked if Hayes could trust him one last time. Pressing herself against his chest, the maid asked His Majesty for forgiveness. Looking at the king with embarrassment, she declared that she was so touched that she could not stop crying. The girl hugged him back and promised that she would always be by his side. Jared thanked her for that. Tears welled up in the eyes of the happy maid. Frowning, the guy decided that he had to answer for all the wrongdoings that his character had committed. In the dining room, there was a long table with many chairs and a harp in the corner. With her hands pressed to her chest in embarrassment, Hayes said that she was not happy with this arrangement. The young man put a fork with vegetables on it in his mouth. The girl said that if you only eat vegetables and grass, you might fall from exhaustion. Stuffing the root of the plant into his mouth, the fat man declared that there was no other way and it would only benefit him. He continued to consume grass, which has a negative effect on satiety levels, and is in a sense beneficial to the diet. Having closed his eyes in disgust, the main character noted the disgusting taste of this herb, similar to sour milk, to which soybean paste had been added. Notifications popping up one after another said that consuming Merlin herb into spa leaves promotes the breakdown of fat and increases metabolism, due to which additional calories are consumed and intense stimulation is activated. The fat man's belly began to noticeably decrease. Realizing that he was about to throw up, Jared covered his mouth with his hands, stopping the urge to gag. Hayes put a plate of steak on the table, saying she had prepared soy meat just in case. Scratching her cheek in embarrassment, the girl explained that she had learned to cook this dish for the sake of the king's health and offered to try it, despite the fact that he had always thrown it away before. The guy shed a tear, wondering how his character could mock such an angel. Imagining himself soaring into the sky on angel's wings, the fat man thought that her cooking was at a level and felt the rotten taste disappear from her mouth. After putting the steak on his fork, he decided to try it. Putting a piece of meat in his mouth, the young man thought about the fact that, judging by the documents, Cribia is located in the northernmost part of the continent. Imagining a kingdom surrounded by snow-capped mountains, he thought that the kingdom was very cold, making farming impossible, and that the Class F desert land was inhabited by poisonous insects, wild animals, and bandits. But despite this land has many advantages. Hayes watched contentedly as the king ate meat. The plate was empty in an instant. The main character realized that his main problem was his weakness, which did not allow him to properly use the advantages of the kingdom. Resolutely rising from the table, he decided that he should start with himself. An angry Isabella appeared, demanding that the spiritual eye be given to her. Her sudden appearance caused the guy to choke. The fat man asked why the demon was still here, to which Isabel's head hung in the air, replied that she would not allow him to laugh at her like that. The demon warned that it would follow him for the rest of his life and torment him until he died and returned the spiritual eye. Jared swallowed nervously. The sun illuminated the royal mansion. The guy thought that he would not be able to resolve this matter so easily. 10 years ago, a man in uniform knocks on the door, calling for His Majesty to open it. The man continued to bang on the door, saying that the death of the king was very sad news, but at the moment it was necessary to forget about the past and think only about the future. There was no light in the room. The person on the other side of the door promised to help get through this troubled time. The prince sat by his bed, not paying attention to his cries. Tears welled up in the boy's eyes as he thought about his father. It was snowing outside, and someone in the mansion asked why the king was suddenly calling them out of the blue. Chuckling, the man with the eye patch suggested that a New Year's party was planned. Taking a sip from the bottle of alcohol, he looked around. Hayes stood in the corridor with a red-haired maid. The man exhaled next to her ear. Having hugged both girls, he wished them good morning. The oppressed maid said good morning to Glegus, who praised her for her politeness. Biting his lower lip, the man expressed his confusion as to why such a beautiful girl would love the fat king, and thought that one day she would become his girlfriend. A man with a sword walking towards them asked what his comrade was doing and condemned him for thoughtlessly flirting with the maids. Hayes turned to greet lackeys, who continued to lecture him about inappropriate behavior at court. Noticing him, Glegus opened his mouth in shock. Gritting his teeth, the man said that no one would dare lecture the head of public order. His statement that constant bark whispering had led to nothing caused lackeys to furrow his eyebrows in anger. Having collided with their foreheads, they began to argue. Lackeys asked to repeat what he had said, to which Glagus sarcastically asked if he was deaf. An elderly man appeared in front of them, hastening to end the argument because of the imminent arrival of the king. Lackeys turned around, noticing Mr. Auburn. Turning away, Glagus declared that the toothless dog and the old man were still disgracing the kingdom. Looking after him, lackeys asked how such a scoundrel was entrusted with such an important position. Auburn replied that he fully understood his feelings and that it could not be changed just like that, and then invited him to go to the dining room. All the most important people in the kingdom gathered around the table. The bald man, putting his hand to his mouth, whispered with his colleague, not understanding what really happened, which is why the king initiated the meeting. Those gathered were surprised that His Majesty, sitting at the table, was reading documents. Vargas took a sip from the bottle. One of those present said that the rumors did not lie. Placing a bottle of alcohol on the table, the man mockingly said that it was not becoming for a king to engage in all this routine. Smirking, he asked His Majesty to quickly end the meeting and have a drink with him. Vargas added that he had hidden a bottle of noble alcohol, which the king would surely like. The protagonist's hand trembled. Putting his hand to his chin thoughtfully, Jared considered this sentence. Glaucus smiled smugly, suggesting an addition to calling lovely young ladies, and thought that this method always helped to take the king away from pressing problems and slow down all affairs in the kingdom. Lackeys, who was watching what was happening, thought that this time he had to be stopped, no matter what happened, for the sake of Cribia. The king pointed his finger at Glaucus and asked why he came to the meeting in such a drunken state. The unexpected question caused horror on the face of the security chief. Lackeys gave him a surprised look. Glaucus laughed, bringing the bottle to his mouth, and said that they had recently been drinking together. The main character used a magic arrow spell. Because of the spell, the bottle was broken into pieces. With only one bottle left in the man's hands, the king explained that if it were not for the importance of this meeting, he would not have been so lenient. Gritting his teeth, Glaerix could not believe that His Majesty would use magic like this. With his hand on the pile of documents, Jared finally decided to move on to the topic of the meeting. Closing his eyes, he asked the head of the guard if he was satisfied with the fact that he constantly used his power to take money from merchants, making up for his greed. Shocked, Glaucus stood up from the table. The king continued his speech, saying that due to the greed shown, the life of the population of the kingdom had fallen into decay, concentrating a clod of energy in his hand. The guy said that the people had stopped believing in the authorities because all the property acquired with such difficulty was taken away from them. An illegal tax collection, human trafficking, and illegal training of mercenaries in the territory of Cribia were flourishing in the kingdom. The young man summoned a fireball over his hand, confidently knitting his eyebrows. He stated that, unlike a broken bottle, the punishment for these sins would be much worse. After saying that the king was going to burn his face, Glaucus widened his eyes in shock. He jumped out of his seat, knocking over his chair and screaming. The fireball rushed after him. With his mouth wide open, the man tried to escape from the flames flying behind him. The fireball hit him in the back. Glaucus fell to the floor. The skin on his back was burned. The main character said that he would have killed him on the spot, but he wants to follow the laws. Looking at the head of the guard, the king announced that from that day on, he was removing him from this position. The words that an investigation would be carried out into all corruption operations carried out in the kingdom shocked everyone present. All those gathered immediately fell to the floor, bowing before His Majesty and asking forgiveness for their negligence. Lackeys watched in amazement, thinking about how the king was able to resist the military master Glaucus. Using the power of a fourth-class magician from the Eucanis family with deep magical roots, imagining his predecessor, Lord Barrett, against Jared's background, he thought they looked alike. Turning to the perplexed lackeys, the guy appointed him the new head of public order in Crivia. In response to his objections, the young man stated that this was the king's order, after which the man bowed to him, declaring that he was ready to follow further instructions. The main character asked if anyone had any objections. The people who bowed before him answered in the negative, knitting his eyebrows together menacingly. He thought that all was not lost for the reputation and dignity of his character. Seeing the status windows for everyone present, Jared noticed a clear problem with the placement of personnel, as no one was in the right place. He looked around, noticing Auburn to the side. The old man smiled. Smiling back, the guy decided to fix everything with the help of his spiritual eye. 1 month later, snow covered the roofs of the houses, and a conversation was taking place in one of them. The beaten resident clasped his hands together, begging for mercy on him because he would no longer be able to trade if he did not have money. A man with white hair threatened him with a knife, ordering him to shut up, stop making noise, and just pay for his place. The man in the bandage noticed that Grouse had not come for a bribe recently. His friend assumed that he had gone on a trip to warmer climes. The robber was contentedly holding a gold coin in his hands. The man said that he was ordered not to spend the money and keep it for himself. Someone's voice was heard behind the door. One of the robbers asked the other to go out and check who had come. The bald man opened the door slightly to find out who was behind it. On the threshold stood the smiling protagonist, greeting the perplexed robber. Having widened his eyes in surprise, the bandit asked why some fat man was standing outside the door. Someone's fist immediately flew into his jaw. The robber flew into the air, causing confusion on the faces of the rest of the gang. And angry lackeys declared that no one would dare insult the king, even if they did not need a head on their shoulders. Jared waved his hand, reassuring the head of security, and said that there was nothing wrong with insults. Looking at the stunned bandit, he added that these people illegally received money for the place from merchants and residents of the kingdom. Frowning his eyebrows, the guy ordered to seize everyone without reserve. Gritting his teeth contentedly, Lackey said that the order would be carried out. The appearance of the chief of security, ready to hold a trial right here and now, shocked the unsuspecting robber. One of them came out through the back door with a huge bag of loot. The man began to sneak along the street amid the noise of a fight. The king, who came out into the street, took him by surprise with the question of where he was going. Summoning a magic arrow, he put the bandit who threw the bag to flight. The spell rushed after him, causing the robber to scream in pain. Residents of the kingdom took to the streets, rejoicing and glorifying the king and the head of the guard. To the general joyful cries of people who had been waiting for a long time to catch the scoundrels, the guards led the gang members in handcuffs. Lackeys clenched his fist victoriously and declared that His Majesty had honestly admitted his past misdeeds and promised to try to put the lives of his citizens above all else. The head of security announced that catching the criminals was just the beginning. One of the robbers looked down in frustration, thinking about how Glagas could have made a mistake. Lackeys asked the citizens not to forget about the actions of the king, who values them. The man handed the poor man bread, saying that the generous ruler ordered food to be given to the hungry. The head of the guard asked the inhabitants of the kingdom to be grateful. The bard, sitting on the fountain in front of a crowd of people, sang a song that a new sun had risen over frozen trivia. Citizens greeted the protagonist as he rode on horseback. All the important people of the kingdom gathered in the dining room again. People began to relate to the authorities a little better. Smiling, Lackey said that the appearance of the king's supporters was a great success. Jared said that his efforts were not in vain. He asked whether his comrade liked the new position, to which the smiling chief of security answered in the affirmative. The man said that he was happy to be in the place that suits him best. The guy took a sip from his mug. A notification that appeared stated that his magical power had increased by 1 unit. The young man turned to his colleague and said that he was pleased that he was doing well. Hoping that everything would continue like this, the king, sitting at the table in front of his companions, began a meeting. Over the past month, they have managed to catch all the criminals that are in the kingdom, thanks to which security and public opinion have improved greatly. The knight held a shield in front of him. A guy with blades stood next to him. Lackeys was given the disposal of skilled warriors, whom the main character selected with the help of the spiritual eye, and who united under the name of the king. Isabella's face appeared behind Jared, still demanding to give her the spiritual eye. Aubryn, looking at the piece of paper in his hands, said that a new cultivation method had been developed to allow farming, but the long cold winter and many harmful plants remained a big problem. Abella, scratching his temple with his finger, read that he was promoting the magic stone of Cribia as a special product, but for good results he needed more time. Patting himself on the stomach, the king thought that without talents, the spiritual eye did not make much sense, so he needed to put in a little more effort. Noticing the guy slapping his stomach, Lackey said that this movement must mean something. Scratching his stomach, the young man replied that this was an exercise known in other countries for weight loss. Giving a thumbs up, the head of security said that with the weight loss, he would become more like a real king. Laughing at this line, the main character thought to himself that this move was actually not related to diet and was a way to increase the stats of killing magic. By imagining his body as streams of energy, he first channeled magic into both hands and then back into the body, thus causing the magic increased bug. The image of a game developer appeared in his head. Jared remembered that Paradiso officially had no bugs, but he still managed to notice that thanks to this method, the level rose by 12 points within a month. Summoning a clod of energy in his hand, the guy decided that with this method he could use 4th-class magic several more times. Someone rushed into the dining room. The man, with his mouth wide open, hurried to report the latest news to His Majesty. Everyone present looked at him when the guard announced that the search party had found a gang of thieves hiding in the mine. The words that there were slaves among them made the young man frown. 1 year ago, 2 swords crossed in battle. 2 warriors fought each other. A little girl watched their battle. Looking admiringly at one of the fighters, she noted his skill with the sword. 2 strangers leaned over her, saying that if the girl continued to watch their colleagues, trouble might happen. Smiling joyfully, the girl greeted her friends. The girl with red hair said that she would face punishment for absenteeism. Raising a barrel of water, the girl exclaimed that she was still faster than the others. The guy called Lana a strong woman. A butterfly flew against the background of a clear sky. The blue sky was reflected in the barrel. One of Lana's friends said that she was already 14 years old, and asked if she would become a servant in a rich house. The butterfly sat on the edge of the barrel. The joyful girl answered in the affirmative, turning her back to the girl with red hair. Lena said that the director of the orphanage had found this house for her, and she hoped that it would be a wonderful place. The girl, looking forward, said that she wanted to recruit her into their army. The girl smiled, calling her friends. The warriors looked back, asking what happened. With her hands behind her back, the orphan asked if she could one day become a powerful warrior if she tried hard enough. The butterfly flew high into the sky. The girl said that she did not want to be a maid. The guy burst out laughing, drawing his sword from its scabbard. He asked if she knew why there were so few female warriors in the world. A sharp swing of the sword raised clouds of dust into the air. Turning serious, the guy sternly replied that the world was too dangerous and that diligence and courage were not enough. Lana grabbed her dress when her friend said that most women either gave up after really realizing it or died, taking off his glove with his teeth. The guy objected that men were no exception. Looking at his scars, he said that gender is not so important. What is important is ability, talent, diligence, and will. The butterfly flapped its wings. The guy explained that his young friend was clearly superior to them in abilities and therefore could become a warrior. Patting the girl on the head, the girl with red hair asked her to come at any time if she had nowhere to go, because as the commander of the army, she would hire her immediately. Lana smiled enthusiastically and agreed, remembering this conversation. The girl sat in prison. There were heavy shackles on her hands and feet. Placing her hands to her head, she cried bitterly. An image of the orphanage director holding the hands of other children appeared in her head. The man smiled, calling the orphan an angel, whom the Almighty sent to the orphanage. And hoping that she would continue to support them, Lena smiled joyfully and agreed. The robber, baring his teeth, said that the director of the shelter sold her to bandits. Clenching her fist, the girl screamed that this couldn't happen because the director had promised to send her to work as a maid for a rich family. The gang of bandits laughed. The man with a mug of beer in his hands called her a stupid slave. The robber, holding a whip, said that there is not much difference between a slave and a maid. Swinging his whip over the girl, he said that slaves should speak more politely. The whip hit the orphan on the back. Watching her head, Lana screamed that they were mistaken because the director was not that kind of person. There were children behind bars. A month passed after the girl was sold into slavery. Sometimes she was subjected to corporal punishment, but almost all the rest of the time she spent in a prison cell. A girl with red hair turned to her, asking if the slave was from Majorca. Looking at the ceiling, she said that slavery was destined for her. Lanta asked what she was talking about. People gathered in front of the auction stage, where a child stood. A girl with red hair explained that most Mallorcan orphans are sold into slavery. Smiling, she said that the director also took part in this and advised him to discard any other thoughts. Lena hugged her knees, declaring that she would not give up and would definitely get out of here. Stuffing her finger into her nose, the girl with red hair called her funny. Lena asked if she really didn't want to leave here. The girl holding out her hand said that she had not thought about it, then said her name and offered to live together in this hell until they die. Lena moved away from her, saying that her words were making her mood drop. Manji, laughing, replied that she was a realist. The girls, who quickly became friends, carried baskets of laundry along the corridors of the mine. Another month passed. They walked past the bars behind which other slaves were sitting. There weren't many child slaves in this place, but there was no will of their own, so most of the slaves looked like soulless dolls. Lana looked through the bars with a slave with a broken will. There are much fewer problems, and selling such a slave was not difficult. Girls under 15 years old did not have to worry about anything since they were the most dear slaves. Lana, resolutely knitting her eyebrows, said that she would never give up. 6 months passed. The girl got used to constant work. Soup was boiling in the cauldron. Manny said that Krivia was a more backward country than Majorca. The orphans were peeling potatoes. Lena thought that her friend taught her a lot. Manny stated that Krivia was gradually declining due to the deserted land and the young king who did not have any special talents. Holding a knife and a potato, Manny turned to her friend when she asked where she got such knowledge. Laughing, she replied that she had good hearing, thanks to which she overheard the conversations of the robbers. While stirring the soup, the girl said that Krivia is full of monster hunters, but there is no work for hired soldiers, so Lena's friends will not come here to help. The orphan displeasedly thanked her for these words. Clenching her fists, the girl looked at the chains, deciding never to give up. Holding a ladle in her hands, Manny called her the most persistent person in her life. Looking away, she whispered that she really liked it. A snowstorm hit the mine. A year passed. The girls turned 15 years old. Lena sat in front of her friend, who had a fever. Her face was red, and sweat was running down her entire body. Putting her hand on her shoulder, the girl realized that she had a fever and that trouble could happen if nothing was done. The robber, throwing his feet on the table, said that Glaudus, who asked to believe only him, had fallen into the clutches of the fat king. Taking a sip from the mug, he displeasedly stated that because of Glagas they could not sell the dirty slaves, and continued to hide in the damp mine. Lena called out to him to attract attention. Holding on to the bars, the girl asked for a cup of warm broth for a friend who had a high fever. Sitting on her knees and clasping her hands, she promised to obey and not say anything against in exchange for a cup of broth. The man looked in her direction. He seated Manti at the table and placed a bowl of soup in front of her. Lena pushed a hot mug towards her friend and asked her to eat before the food cooled down. Having put his arm around the girl's shoulder, the robber took her away, declaring that he had business with her. Manny jumped up from the table, calling out to her friend. The slave looked back, saying that everything was fine. Grabbing her face, the bandit said that the patient needed to rest. At that same second, a plate of hot soup flew into his face. He put his hand to the burned side of his face, screaming in pain. Manny grabbed her friend's hand, shouting that they had a chance. She wanted to run away, but for some reason Lena resisted. Not understanding what was happening, she said that they were just asking for soup. Frowning furiously, Manny declared that her friend was not a slave and that she should not stay here when the girl reminded her that her friend said that she would get out of here. The robber reached out his hand for them. Grabbing Lena, the man bared his teeth and pulled out a knife, asking where they were going. In a rage, he slashed the slave with a knife. Lena opened her mouth in shock. Blood gushed from Manny's chest. Having hit the bandit in the face, the girl screamed for him to let her go. She ran to her friend, who was bleeding on the floor. Sobbing with grief, Lena asked why she went under the knife instead. Smiling, Manny replied that her life was too wasted. Because the orphan grew up all her life among robbers and saw only murders, so she was not fit for anything else. Introducing her friend's friends, she stated that Lana had a beautiful dream, and that at first she herself had no words. Raising her bloody hand, Manny said that she was jealous of her friend, which is why she wanted to protect her. The girl closed her eyes, wishing her never to give up. Lana replied that she would never give up and would definitely get out. Behind her, the robber swung his knife without turning around. The girl said that she would do everything to get out of here. Gritting her teeth, she added that she would get out even if she had to kill everyone here. The stunned criminal widened his eyes, not understanding what was happening. The man pressed the slave's head to the floor, furiously asking who she dared to stare at. His eye was red because of the burn. The robber shouted that because of the orphan he had a burn on half his face and that he had a headache since the very morning. Because of them, he wished death for the girl, brandishing a knife. A voice from the side asked if this could be called a burn. The bandit turned around questioningly. A flash appeared before his eyes. Bright flames engulfed his entire body, causing the man to scream in pain. The main character, holding his hand in front of him, declared that this was a real burn. The king, together with the head of the guard, stood in front of the entrance to the snow-covered mine. Lackeys asked how he knew that the hideout of Chad's gang was in the Illume mine. Steam was coming out of Jared's mouth. He replied that after the disappearance of Guagas, who was covering for them, the robbers hoped that the king would rampage for a couple of days and calm down, and the mine was an ideal place to sit in peace. Lackeys put on his knight's helmet and asked if His Majesty had any other insightful thoughts. Taking his sword out of its sheath, the guy replied that this was too much. He turned around and ordered everyone inside. A whole army stood in front of him. The young man said that they had come here to destroy all those who make slaves out of people. The warriors in knightly armor listened attentively to his speech that they must free all the oppressed in order to achieve justice. The faces of the soldiers expressed determination. They were ordered not to spare anyone. Raising his sword, the king rushed into the mine, shouting that he would fight for Krivia. The knights fought with the robbers with swords. One of the gang members asked to gather those inside the mine. The man who was told to call Chad ran into the mine. However, the next moment a sword pierced his back. Lackeys looked menacingly at the enemy, saying that no one would escape from here. The robbers were struck one after another by his lightning strikes. A knight with a shield held back enemy attacks. The bloody sword lay on the ground. There was a pickaxe next to a pile of stones. Finding himself in front of several entrances deep into the mine, the king said that there were too many forks here. Turning to his army, he declared that the robbers' level of weapon proficiency was no better than that of an ordinary person and ordered the soldiers to split up to search everything here. The angry robber, holding a knife over the slave, shouted that because of her he had a burn on half his face and had a headache since the morning. The man turned around when he heard a question about whether this wound could be called a burn. A bright flash appeared ahead. A wave of fire engulfed his body. The main character, from whose hand the flame was emanating, said that now the robber had a real burn. He ran forward, thinking about how he often saw slave prisons in games, but in reality it looked much more disgusting. Kneeling down on one knee in front of Lana, Jared asked if she was okay. The answer was yes. Biting her lower lip, the girl said that her friend was not so lucky. The orphan explained that Manny died saving her. The guy looked at the girl's dead body, frowning. The young man thought that it was too late to use restoration magic. Having hugged Lena, he asked for forgiveness, saying that he should have come earlier. The girl began to cry. Looking at the sobbing slave, the main character noticed her emaciated body and dry skin on her hands and thought that she had to go through a lot. The leader of the gang, heavily intoxicated, entered the room and asked what all the fuss was going on. Seeing Jared in front of him, he was surprised that the fat king himself had come here. Chad shouted that it would be better for the king to sit at home and eat fatty meat, and asked what he forgot here. The guy knitting his eyebrows angrily did not understand the question asked to him, thinking that his character's life was too worthless because everyone knows the king is stupid fat man. Gritting his teeth and gathering energy in his hand, he promised to catch Chad and personally send him to hell. Creating a ball of energy in his hand, the leader of the bandits laughed, saying that such a fat man could not use magic. The young man frowned angrily. The bandit looked him straight in the eyes. A bolt of light erupted from his hand. Using speed magic, the main character was able to... This attack, Chad opened his mouth in shock, not understanding what kind of magician would use speed magic in battle. The king began to run around him, not allowing him to follow him. Trying to discern the opponent's movements, Chad guessed that it would be difficult for him to change direction since this entry-level magic is quite difficult to control, despite the fact that it gives the owner's body super speed. Deciding to blow up everything around him, the gang leader raised his hands up, focusing powerful energy above himself. The sudden attack knocked out his jaw. The next blow landed on the elbow. A beam of light struck his side. The robber's body was twisted by multiple attacks, stopping. Jared thought that his enemy had used super powerful magic that required a lot of control while intoxicated, which is why there were so many holes. The guy sheathed his sword, declaring that his opponent was too weak and that he did not even have the strength to be angry, after which he wished Chad to simply disappear into the abyss. There was a ringing sound. A notification appeared saying that the war against crime task had been completed and that the level of devotion of the inhabitants of the kingdom had risen to 23. In a new message, it was written that the task of destroying the cave gang had been completed, and that the level of devotion had risen by another 11 units. A sign appeared on which it was written that the level of devotion had reached 100 and that a small golden age had begun. A bright sun shone over the city. Chad died, and the matter with the mine was quickly resolved. Lackeys rode on horseback, accompanying the cart. All of Chad's accomplices, who were involved in murders and kidnappings, were sentenced to death. The cart carried people who were enslaved and whom they promised to return to their families, accompanied by guards. Wrapped in a blanket, Lena asked if she could really go to trivia. The main character sitting opposite answered in the affirmative, saying that the director of the shelter would still want to sell her again if she returned to Mallorca. Smiling, Jared explained that he was always looking for young and talented people who could work with him, so he would be grateful if the girl moved to their kingdom. After seeing that the king would take responsibility for her and make her a first-class knight, Lena smiled joyfully and thanked His Highness. Raising her hands enthusiastically, the girl promised to become a skilled warrior who would live up to his expectations. The guy replied that he was looking forward to this. Rounding his eyes, he thought that he did not expect to see Lana here. An image of the earth being burned to the ground appeared in his head 10 years later during the Great Host War. This girl would have to stand in the vanguard of the Demon King's army. The young man imagined how many warriors rushed to attack, but the blows would be easily repelled because Lena is the strongest tank who does not lose. The girl in the black demonic suit grinned arrogantly. The fortress she was guarding could not be taken by storm because Lana was an excellent protector of the Demon King's army. The protagonist took the hand of the innocent girl sitting in front of him, thinking that it was good that he was able to meet her, because then he could stop the orphan from falling into the hands of the Demon King. The girl watched in surprise as their hands glowed. Jared decided that in preparation for the Great War of the Host, he would make her a rising star not of the devil but of his army. Looking down intensely, the guy thought that the only problem remained in the neighboring state, Mallorca, which allowed the illegal trade in slaves, and therefore there were other violations that had a bad impact on the territory of Cribia. The young man asked himself where the scoundrel Horgus was going to spend all his money. Meanwhile, the lights were burning in the windows of the house in Mallorca. The bald man surrounded by girls, but he began to hear more often how Crivia was praised, which made his mood worse. He asked the white-haired man with a pipe in his hands what he thought about this situation. Being a friend of Glaga's, Fru replied that he would prepare everything as required by their position. Smirking, he stated that he needed to repay his friend's insult. Moonlight illuminated the night city. The killer, standing on the roof, watched the patrol knights below. When one passed him, the killer deftly jumped from one roof to another. Having landed on another roof, a man in a dark cape with a hood stopped. A moment later, he threw the bag from his shoulder into the alley between the houses. Blood spread across the ground after the bag landed. The killer stood on the roof, watching the result of his actions. The mask covered the killer's face while he looked into the alley. The events were transferred to the next day. Jared was barely breathing, trying to run a few more meters. Sweat was actively dripping from his face. Unlike him, Lena ran calmly and was not out of breath. The coach of Jared and Lana, who was watching the run, shouted to them, notifying them of the last lap. Tired to death, Jared smiled, asking Lynn if she felt better after her morning run. The happy girl smiled and raised her hand, saying that the shaft was too narrow, and the air there was terrible, so she liked everything. Sweating profusely, Jared smilingly suggested that Lena study together and they would find her a teacher later. The coach, who was watching everything, fell into a stupor, seeing how Jared almost lost consciousness due to fatigue. While eating, Jared glanced to the side and asked if this was a message from Lord Avil. Hayes handed the letter to Jared, saying that this letter arrived this morning and it was from Avil. Looking at the protagonist reading the letter, Lena asked him to tell her how everything was resolved. Jared continued reading and said that he would keep it short. Next he began to talk about Lord Aubryn, who was engaged in growing crops called retria, and the first sprout sprouted from him. And due to the fact that their kingdom mainly imported products, due to this they would at least slightly reduce expenses. Avil was able to attract 1.5 times more monster hunters than usual. They began to sell the crystals that they obtained through their hunts, and income doubled compared to last month. Lena smiled, saying that her friend told her that Krivia was getting worse. But it turned out to be wrong, because this place is much better than she thought. The protagonist, continuing to read the documents, said that it was only now that everything began to improve, but soon everyone on the mainland would know about Krivia. Suddenly, lackeys came up and called out to Jared. The protagonist looked at lackeys in bewilderment and asked what happened. He answered him by saying that he had an urgent report. Entering one of the alleys guarded by guards, Jared asked if it was discovered this morning, to which lackeys, walking next to him, replied by saying that it was exactly like that. But it was discovered not only in this place, but also in others. The protagonist frowned, not understanding who dared to do such a thing on the territory of the kingdom. In front of them was the corpse of a wolf monster, and blood was spread all over the ground in the alley. Lackeys closed his eyes, saying that he had no words because he should have paid more attention to the security. Sitting down next to the monster's corpse, Jared told lackeys not to blame herself because none of the inhabitants were hurt, especially since Krivia is a very small kingdom. There wasn't even a fortress, so it was not surprising that in such a situation they were quite vulnerable. Looking at the corpse, the protagonist thought about the possible criminal and the benefit that he could get by throwing corpses on the streets of the city. A sudden cry from a girl asking for help made Jared and lackeys turn around. The protagonist got up and walked towards the exit from the alley, listening to the girl begging to help her and in return selling herself. A little girl, almost crying, held the hand of a man in green robes who was shouting that he did not have this medicine. Jared's unexpected question about the girl's identity made the man and girl suddenly stand in a stupor and stop screaming. Many people recognized Jared's identity when he went outside, but without paying attention to them, the king asked the girl what medicine she was looking for. Clenching her fists, the girl, barely holding back tears, said that her name was Mia and her mother fell ill with Rhinella disease. Jared's eyes widened in shock upon hearing Roland's illness. When Mia began to talk about the fact that she needed medicine, the doctor raised his head and shouted, saying that Roland's disease was almost incurable. Putting his hand to his face, the protagonist thought he knew that this disease could only be cured with the blessing of a great priest or a precious cure for all diseases. Jared mentally imagined bacteria and viruses. Rhinella's disease was similar to tuberculosis. It was often contracted in dungeons or from wild monsters of the Rhinella kingdom, hence the name. Sitting down on one knee, the king asked Mia to take him to her mother. Smiling, the king announced that he had a way to heal her mother. Soon they came to a 2-story house. Climbing the stairs, the girl looked at the king, saying that her mother was on the 2nd floor. Looking at the dilapidated staircase, the king wondered whether the staircase would withstand him. Going upstairs, the king could see Mia abruptly enter one room, calling for her mother. Knight walked up to the bed where her sick mother lay in, almost crying, said that she had brought a person who would help her. Looking at the arrival, the sick and exhausted woman asked the doctor for forgiveness and asked to leave. But the protagonist saw with his spiritual eye that the woman had 7 days to live. Jared became a little nervous and frowned, realizing that she could die in 7 days, after which he told the woman that he did not need payment and they could be calm and trust him. Knight stopped crying and smiled, saying that it was the king, not the doctor, and he came to save her. Jared pointed at himself and asked Mia's mother if they knew each other, after she said they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Closing her eyes, the woman said that 8 years ago she was invited to work as a cook in the castle. Jared covered his face with his hand and apologized for all his actions. The woman looked at the king, who sat down next to her bed, and told him that he should not have come so close because this disease was too dangerous. But the protagonist interrupted her, asking her not to say that. The king asked Mia, who was standing at the door, to bring a wet towel. Then Jared stood up abruptly and looked to the side. He walked to the window and began to lift the lattice window. Picking it up, he looked outside, confirming his fears. Poking his head out and looking at the monster's corpse, Jared asked Mary how long ago she started seeing monsters. Mary turned her head and looked at the king and said that she had worked for a long time as a cook in a detachment that was engaged in the sale of crystals obtained from monsters holding the window. And looking down, Jared said that the Ronella disease is not transmitted between people, but everyone who had contact with the monster becomes infected. But until recently, this disease had almost no symptoms, so most live in ignorance. Mary, who was listening to the king, frowned and coughed into her handkerchief and asked if she would, and who brought the corpse to her house. Hayes and Lena entered the room. They brought all the necessary things and medicines, telling the king that they brought all the things that he asked for. Rolling up his sleeves, Jared said to just trust him because he won't leave until her condition improves. Mary smiled sincerely and almost crying, thanked Jared for his help and his generosity, although she did not know how to repay him for it. Jared smiled, saying that she first needed to get well, and then think about it. While he was saying this, two girls rushed around the room preparing all the necessary things. The killer sitting on the roof chuckled, calling the attempt to prepare a medicine nonsense. But the angry lackeys suddenly appeared behind him and took out his blade. Frightened the killer. Lackey said that their king had never made a mistake. Looking at lackeys, the purple-haired killer listened as he said that their king foresaw that the criminal would appear at the crime scene. Very angry, lackeys frowned deeply. He asked the criminal if he was the one who dumped the body of the monster in their kingdom where people are at risk of contracting the Ronella disease. Grinning, the criminal squinted his eyes, asking lackeys if it was so interesting. While Jared prepared the medicine, sitting right on the floor with Hayes, Lena hugged Mia and watched everything. Hayes, holding a mortar in one hand and a pestle in the other, said that finding these medicines would not be difficult, and if they could make a cure for Ronella's disease, she could not imagine such a thing. Jared sat in front of the flask alchemy machine he had created, preparing a potion. The protagonist involuntarily remembered the site on which the composition of the medicine for Ronella was posted. During the game in Paradiso, pharmaceutical players were developing a cure for Ronella's disease, but suddenly someone posted a recipe, thanks to which almost everyone learned about it. Thanks to this, 10 years later, he sits and prepares this medicine. Mary turned her head and addressed the king. Exhausted, Mary opened one of her eyes and asked Jared why a person like him would try so hard for some poor commoner. Jared, sitting with his back to Mary, said that anyone who has been sick before knows what it is. Looking at the back of the king sitting in front of her, Mary asked if he had Ronella disease. Lena and Mia looked at the king when he said that he grew up in a loving family and was never sick. Grabbing Mary's hand, Jared said that there was something else besides his mother's affection. Stroking the exhausted woman's hand, Jared began to remember the old story. The moment, when they lived in poverty, they were not in a position where their mother could get examined at the hospital. When they finally arrived at the hospital, it turned out that his mother already had the last stage of cancer, which is incurable. He then sat in front of her couch and cried. He trembled all over, feeling not so much sadness as anger, because even in such an ordinary situation, he did not have the ability to solve this problem. He cried then. Even after he wiped them away, they continued to flow from his eyes again. Jared still blamed himself for this. Shaking the flask in his hand, Jared understood what Mia was experiencing, which is why he was here. Looking at the red liquid in the flask, the king realized that he did not want Mia to feel the same as he did. At this time, the criminal and lackeys were moving along the roofs. Lackeys and the criminal clashed blades, starting an intense battle. The angry chief of security frowned as he moved at great speed. His opponent swung his blade, wanting to kill lackeys. Lackeys and the assassin clashed blades at great speed. Suddenly, the killer's blade changed its trajectory. Lackeys clenched his teeth, looking at the tip of the blade approaching his throat. Suddenly, the head of the guard blocked the enemy's sword with his own right in front of his face. Lackeys pressed down forcefully on his sword, causing the assassin to retreat and his hands to tremble. Looking at Lackey's sword, which was already a few centimeters from his head, the killer realized that he was simply rudely pressing on him with force. Using his speed, he sharply turned his body to dodge the enemy's sword. A moment later, he took his chance and threw a kick. The killer's foot hit Lackey square in the face. Lackey staggered slightly after the assassin's blow. Suddenly, the criminal's eyes widened in shock. The evil lackeys looked at his opponent and asked if this was all he could do. The chief of security's sword began to cut through the roof, moving towards the enemy. Lackey's eyes lit up as he swung his blade upward, asking his opponent how he, with such pathetic abilities, still dares to touch Krivia. The criminal managed to place his blade in the path of the strike. With one swing, Lackey sent the criminal flying. The killer was horrified. Looking at Lackey's, he was amazed at his strength because no one told him that the head of security was so strong. Falling down, the criminal looked at his opponent, wondering where he got such strength from. In fact, the reason why Lackey's was so much stronger than the assassin was due to his abilities. His powerful body coupled with mana was simply terrifying, and during the battle, his eyes lit up. His complete order and embodiment of justice brought his physical abilities to the maximum. If Lackey's fought with the villains, the killer landed on the roof without taking his eyes off his opponent. Lackeys, shrouded in an aura, stood in front of the criminal, saying that there was no mercy for him. It was basically impossible for the villains to defeat Lackeys because of his skills. Putting his blade in front of him, the criminal said that his thoughts were to kill him if he was caught, but now he would have to abandon this idea. Straightening up, the mercenary continued to look at the head of security. Lackeys screamed as his opponent turned around abruptly, bidding him farewell. Seeing lackeys become even more angry, the mercenary lowered his mask and grinned and said that they would meet soon. Sharply removing his mask, mercenary blew out a huge amount of smoke from his mouth, saying that then there would be a battle to the very end. Lackeys clenched his teeth and frowned at the approaching smoke. A second later, when the smoke cleared, Lackey standing on the roof realized that he had missed his enemy. 2 days later, Mia sat on the floor and watched Jared's mana emanate. Jared collected mana over his palm, and said that it was a clot of mana that was formed through simple imagination. Raising his second hand, Jared said that this mana was formed by a complex method of strong concentration. Mia raised her hand and pointing her finger at one of the clots, asked why she had to develop both directions, if only one way could be developed. The king, who put on a false mustache and a green robe, clenched his hand into a fist, saying that evil magicians burn all the mana that is nearby, in which case those who used the first method turned into fools who are not capable of anything. Mia shuddered, saying it was terrible. Jared's eyes lit up. He extended his hands, scaring Mia, saying that this is why it is worth learning the method of strong concentration, even if it is difficult. Next, the girl pointed her finger at the protagonist, asking why he was wearing such strange clothes. As the king took off his entire outfit, he said that he was just wearing it to create an atmosphere since he became her magic instructor. While Jared and Mia were talking, the door handle clicked and Mary's voice was heard signaling the time for dinner. Mia immediately rushed out, while Jared awkwardly extended his hand trying to stop her because the lesson was not over yet. When Mary entered the room, she asked the standing king if she had disturbed them, to which he smiled and said that he himself was interested in trying her food. Mary, in her new chef's uniform, smiled with her hands clasped in front of her, telling the king that she hoped he liked her food. Talking to each other, the king and the cook left the room. All this time, Isabella hovered near the ceiling and watched Jared. A moment later, she smiled wildly, calling Jared someone else. The mana in the king's room curled in the air and illuminated it. A considerably thinner, Jared sat on the floor while mana swirled around him. Mentally, he thought about the worldview of people who were always trying to find the shortest path. Suddenly, all the mana around the protagonist's body scattered as if in an explosion. Jared at that moment was thinking about a glitchy training method that would allow him to increase his mana level by 2 or 3 points in one day. Upon opening his eyes, the protagonist admitted that most of the people who used this method had rather low skill. Jared looked at the system alerts, which notified him that he had successfully mastered a new training method and could now choose an official name for it, reaching out to the system window. Jared thought that the method of controlling magic, combining the method of training with bugs and the mana of the mage family, could increase the power of magic by 6 points. The protagonist began to write on the system window, mentally telling himself that this training method would become his basis, so he wanted to come up with a name that symbolized it. When he finished writing, the inscription "single-player bug user" was visible on the system window. Isabella stuck out her tongue, saying that she had secretly observed many magicians, but his methods were different from others. Jared raised his head and looked at Isabella, hovering above him, asking if she saw the streams, to which she replied by saying that ordinary people could not see this, but not her. Pointing her finger at Jared, Isabella said that although he did not play by the rules, his mana level was acceptable. The protagonist was horrified when the demon touched his face with her hand, asking if he was from another world. Isabella sticking out her tongue and looking at the guy with a wild grin. The king looked at her and asked her a little nervously what she was talking about. Jared breathed a sigh of relief when Isabella flew away from him, and said that she just wondered if he had come from another continent, because even though she had only heard, they said that people from the Eastern Empire had enormous mana absorption abilities. Raising his finger up, Jared smiled, saying that according to the stories of his ancestors, he had heard the same stories. He then looked at his hand, thinking that the Eastern Empire was a project that the Paradiso development team had been working on for 5 years. He was eagerly awaiting the release of the update, but died before he could try it in the game. Isabella's hair fluttered as she asked Jared what he was thinking about. The demon hugged the protagonist, saying that as long as she was next to him, something interesting always happened. The protagonist, without looking at her, asked what was strange about it. Isabella smiled, offering to talk because anyway, only he could see her. When the demon spread his eye with her fingers, the protagonist activated the spiritual eye, saying that he would not give it up because it was his. Jared screamed in shock when Isabella, putting her hands to her face, said that she would not be upset about the spirit eye and would consider it a wedding gift to her future husband. Touching her tongue with her finger, the demon told Jared that at first he was fat, which was disgusting to look at, but now that he had lost weight, he was handsome. The protagonist became very nervous, asking the demon if that was why she kept looking down at him while he was sleeping. Isabella hugged the protagonist, saying that a man like Jared would be just right for the ghost of a virgin. The protagonist grimaced, horrified, remembering his first kiss. Jared abruptly began to run away from the loving Isabella, saying that he needed to go to Ranella. Reading the letter, Hayes said that Lena was developing too quickly, and it was surprising how the king saw such abilities at first glance, which is exactly what lackeys conveyed. Hearing her, Jared smiled awkwardly, realizing that the strongest warrior of Krivia would only last for a month. Jared asked Hayes, who was sitting across from him, to tell lackeys that he would find a good teacher. Looking out the window, the king began to remember several good candidates for this role. Something was approaching the king's carriage at great speed. When an arrow broke the window and almost hit Hayes, a barrier of mana formed in front of her head and saved her. Shocked, Jared looked out the window while his palm was enveloped in mana. Hayes picked up the broken pieces of the arrow, ignoring the shouts of the knights outside. Many arrows flew into the carriage. The king formed a barrier in front of him, blocking all the arrows and saying that it was like an attack by robbers. When another pair of arrows collided with the barrier, Hayes suddenly screamed. She abruptly stood in front of Jared, saying that she would protect him. This greatly excited Jared. Holding the barrier, Jared shouted to Hayes that it was dangerous because she could get hit. Clinging close to the king, Hayes said that it was her duty to protect the king. Jared hit the girl sharply on the head, ordering her to sit inside and not come out, and if she did, he would kill her himself. The arrows continued to fly at the carriages and knights. The angry king got out of his carriage and approached the knights, calling the enemy's attack a pathetic effort. Isabella asked Jared, who was gritting his teeth, whether he should have helped her, but the protagonist refused her help. Holding the barrier with one hand and forming a mana ball with the other, the protagonist stepped forward. Through the mesh barrier, he could see a crowd of opponents in the distance. One of the robbers turned to the boss, informing him about the magician. Tog, who put his axe on his shoulder, said that that guy still had a reason why he entrusted the mission to them. Jared stopped being angry when he saw a masked man who looked too much like the one lackeys had described to him. Holding a staff in one hand and an axe in the other, Tog rushed straight at the king. The mage killer moved at great speed, shouting that this time there was a newcomer with them, so he would show how everything was done. Spinning his axe all the time, Thog approached Jared using a spinning slaughter. Thog sharply threw his axe straight at the king. Jared was able to dodge by using speed magic, after which he extended his hand with a sphere of mana formed in it. Approaching sharply, he waved his staff and dispelled the sphere of mana, calling Jared's attempt ridiculous. A moment later, Thog struck Jared in the head with his staff. Thog frowned at his opponent. There was not a single scratch on Jared's head, even after being hit by the mage killer. Jared, whose barrier above his head had cracked, looked at Tog, saying that his title was not just a pretty name. The killer opened his eyes wide and shuddered after what he saw. Thog did not stand any longer, and in an instant dealt many blows to the king. Continuing to beat Tug non-stop, he realized that his opponent had at least 4th class. While attacking the barriers that were forming, Tog realized that if he stopped, he would fall under a counterattack, which is why he could not allow the enemy to do anything. Shocked and frightened, the knights watched the battle, worried about their king, and Tog's subordinates grinned, anticipating his victory. Suddenly, the protagonist extended his hand, stopping the staff. Then he trembled in shock, looking at the protagonist who had caught his staff. Jared was a little surprised to learn that the staff was a magical artifact, and he just lacked the artifact. Using magic to increase physical strength, Jared held the staff and smilingly told his opponent that he would take the staff for himself. Looking at the trembling staff, Thog wondered if this magician was originally so strong. Green lines began to spread across the killer's face as Jared told him that he had already blocked his vaunted physical abilities with paralysis magic. Trembling with his whole body, Tog begged for mercy, saying that he would tell everything. Jared raised the axe above his head and smilingly said that of course he would like to listen, but he does not believe the criminals. A moment later, the axe in Jared's hand came down sharply. Events are transferred to the past. Archeans, looking through the small lattice window, said that a merchant without money will not buy good luck. Archeans hit himself over the head, berating himself for hiring security on the cheap. Archeans looked out the window listening to one of the employers tell Tog that this medicine merchant was too good, and he probably had a lot of soldiers on guard. Tog, holding his axe in his hand, looked at the customer, saying that in front of his axe they were nothing more than pigs. The customer held out a bag of money when Tog extended his hand demanding an advance payment. In his mind, the customer, who had recently fought with lackeys, was thinking that the king of Kribia had cured everyone with his potions, which meant that he could easily get the ingredients for it. Looking at Tog, the assassin thought that Jared should go to Ranella, a huge profit from the sale of drugs. Looking at the road, Tog asked the customer whether his victims would definitely appear on this road, to which the customer answered him by saying that the information from his servants was reliable. Archeans, looking out the window, asked himself if there really wasn't a person who could catch this monster, which killed 11 people in a week. Events returned to the moment when the protagonist lowered the axe directly on Tog. Archeans watched the entire battle through the window and listened to the screams of the robbers. Jared soared into the air and began shooting everyone with magic arrows while simultaneously forming a fireball in his hand. Arkeans's cheeks turned red as he looked in admiration at the man who managed to cope with Tog. Looking at Jared floating in the air, Arkeans called him a warrior who would save him. Clinging close to the protagonist, Arkeans smiled thanks to his savior. Rubbing his finger on his cheek, the king called gratitude a good deed. Jared closed his eyes, asking the huddled Arkeans if it was possible to keep his distance. Hayes, standing to the side, was a little embarrassed by this behavior of the rescued boy. Covering his mouth, Arkeans feigned an apology, saying he was overcome with emotion. While riding in the carriage, Jared asked the boy if it was true that he had come to make a deal about the crystals, but Tog attacked him and stole everything. After receiving an affirmative answer, the king put his hand to his chest and asked forgiveness for the fact that there were no supervising guards in the area. Arkean smiled broadly, saying that nothing terrible had happened because he thought that he would die like that until he saw him. Looking at Arkeans, the protagonist used the spiritual eye, remembering who this boy would become, namely the largest ruler of the NPC, who bought a kingdom in the east for an astronomical sum. Jared couldn't help but imagine a statue of Arkeans, who, with the help of his excellent forecasting skills and fashion analysis, identified trends in advance and bought popular products. Jared kept his eyes on Arkeans, wondering what brought the boy here who would in the future become the largest ruler in the east. Arkeans flinched when Jared offered him a deal. The king raised his hand, offering Arkeans 15% of the profits, but he needed to sell instead the product that he was going to trade in Ranella. Looking at how the guy thought, scratching his chin, the protagonist mentally said that of all the outstanding people, he was the most extraordinary, and first it was necessary to conclude a deal with him, arouse interest, and then hire him for a job. Arkeans extended 2 fingers, asking the king to fulfill 2 requests instead of profit. Hayes looked at the guy who was telling the king that if he believed and trusted him, he would find a good place for them. Looking at the guy leaning back in his seat, Jared told him that he agreed, but depending on the situation, he could refuse. Hearing him, Arkeans closed his eyes, saying that the king would most likely listen to his requests. Looking kindly at the king, he asked to call him. A key is the first request, and he will say the second later. While a shocked Jared agreed in a stupor, Isabella appeared above him and began to swear furiously. Soon Jared arrived in the kingdom of Ranella. Then, looking at the busy streets, Hayes said that she used to think that this kingdom was dark and nondescript, but it is quite bright. Aki, holding a box of scrolls in his hand, looked at Hayes, saying that many people thought so, but people could not refuse the jewelry obtained from the dungeon. Looking at the crowd of people in front of you, Aki said that if only the problem of the disease was resolved, the potential of this kingdom would instantly be revealed. Jared glanced at Aki, saying that thanks to him they opened their business in a good place. Aki awkwardly scratched the back of his head, saying that this was all compensation for everything they had done. Like he looked at Jared approaching a huge barrel and asked him if this was exactly the medicine for Ranella's disease that he was going to sell. The king answered him negatively. Jared brought the flask to the tap and opened it slightly, pouring the potion into the flask. At the same moment, the system notified the completion of the production of medicinal herbs. When the king closed the lid, the flask lit up brightly, and the system notified Jared that the medicinal herb had been raised to the 2nd level and the highest growth rates had been achieved in a day. Looking at the system window, Jared confirmed his suspicions about a glitch, due to ignorance of which the production of the medicine at the very beginning took 2 months. Jared smiled, handed the potion to Aki, and said that he needed to sell it, and during the sale tell a few features to the buyer. After some time, Apewi stood in front of a mercenary whose name was Tolan. He was infected with the disease and he urgently needed help. Tolan asked Aki if they would really sell him the medicine for Barfor. Just 1 gold piece. Aki clasped his palms together, saying that only he would sell it for gold because he saw that he was a good person, so this offer was especially for him. Wiki leaned against the mercenary, assuring him that this was not a scam. Tolan handed over a gold coin, saying that he was dying anyway, and he didn't mind 1 gold coin. Aki thanked Tolan for the purchase and then handed him the contract, asking him to sign it. Tolan frowned, looking at the contract, not understanding why this medicine was needed. In the end, the mercenary nevertheless signed the contract, saying that it was quite strange. A moment later, the mercenary drank the entire flask of potion in 1 gulp. Jared, standing to the side, told Tolan that it would be 30 minutes before he felt the effects of the potion. He would be here the whole time so he could rest and come again. The mercenary frowned again, saying that although he believed a key and bought it, but if it was a scam he wouldn't just stand by. Jared smiled and said that in this case he would reimburse the potion in the amount of 1,000 gold. Aki and the king watched the mercenary leave. Aki waved his hand, telling the king and Hayes that he would go and prepare one more thing before the trade began. Deciding to take advantage of this time, the protagonist again leaned the flask against the tap, deciding to try to make the medicine again. While the protagonist and Hayes happily looked at the potion, the system notified the protagonist that the production of the healing herb had been completed, and the crafting skill had increased to the 2nd level, and also that it was impossible to increase the skill within 24 hours. In Paradiso, skill in making medicine was given depending on the product of manufacture. The same mana potion could restore 30 units or 100, depending on the skill, and the penalty that limited the level of skill was 24 hours according to the criteria of the potion itself. But by transferring production rights through a contract to another user, all data except the level of skill that has already been applied to his information will pass to him. That is, even the fine for 24 hours goes to the departed Tolan. Events move forward 2 hours at a time. When the protagonist was looking at the blue sky, Jared and Hayes looked to the side, waiting for a key. Suddenly, both shook in fear as the ground began to shake. Hayes looked to the side to see a whole crowd of people chasing after a key. Hayes started screaming excitedly, asking if people were running towards them, but Jared didn't answer, continuing to look at the crowd. At the front of the crowd, Jared saw a key and their first customer smiling as they rushed towards him. A crowd of people suddenly approached the protagonist and began to demand medicine and scream because of their proximity. Hayes even had to push his master away. Hayes, trembling with her whole body, stood in front of Jared, listening to the crowd screaming, demanding to sell them the medicine. Jared and Hayes smiled as they heard people say that God bless Krivia for them to make the cure. Jared clenched his fist and glared at the crowd, and Hayes began waving her hands, trying to calm the king after someone in the crowd said that, according to rumors, Trivia had a terrible government, but recently the king had come to his senses and was now ruling the country. A key sharply shouted to the crowd of people, notifying them that it was a key who would sell the medicine only today, and if they wanted to buy the medicine on another day, then they could come to Trivia. While drinking the potion, some hunters said that the nightmare forest of Trivia was almost untouched by hunters, so there were still many monsters left there, and for them it would be a gold mine. Other mercenaries drinking their potions listened to Aki shouting that if they bought it on the territory of Krivia, they could buy the medicine cheaper for only 39 gold. Holding a rosary in his hands, Aki did not pay attention to Jared and Hayes, who was tired of bringing the contracts and carrying potions, saying that in the territory of the Adaima Kingdom it was difficult to find medicine for 100 gold, and their medicine was not even half the cost. Happy Aki held the potion in his hand while bags of gold were handed to him, and told everyone to get in line. Large medieval house in the night. Hayes was sleeping peacefully in bed. Jared put his feet up on the table and tossed a coin. Income from sales per day amounted to 12,250 gold. The hero grabbed the coin. He thought that if he converted it into money from his past life, it would be approximately 12 million won. The hero again tossed a coin and looked thoughtfully into space, saying that monster hunters are rich after all. Someone caught the coin and asked if the hero was happy with this income. The hero's blue gaze touched the one who stood behind. He asked why the unknown guest was not sleeping, and asked what happened. Arcanace, with a blush on his face, said that he had come for the remaining reward. Jared smiled and remembered how they asked him for a request, and said that the guy had one more reward left, and said that he could say it. Arcanace put his hand on his chest and closed his eyes. He looked at the hero and said that he wanted to become his servant and manage the merchant union. Jared stood up and Arcanace sat down on one knee. Holding out a coin, the hero clarified about the last request, and the guy said that he still had little experience and was only 20 years old. But if the hero trusted him, he would try to make the union of merchants the best in the north parts of the mainland. The coin sparkled on the guy's leather glove while the hero told him that he had been robbed and that he didn't have a penny behind his back. But he was so brave. Jared smiled and said that, to be honest, having seen his abilities, he himself wanted to make him his servant. But instead of the manager of the merchant union, which is the core of all trade, it is impossible to get him right away. Arkan sheepishly said that he knew this. Jared said a request is a request. The hero held the coin while the guy looked up happily. He put his hand on the guy's shoulder with a smile and said that the insight through which he saw the potential for the development of the curve, the desire to get a high position, and the courage speaks about it directly, and added that the most important thing is luck, because this vacancy is now free. Jared said that he liked Arcanites and called him the head of the trade union. The guy stood up and began to thank the hero while he waved his hand, saying that there was enough work for today, and clarified that tomorrow they would return to the kingdom. Jared looked away and was glad that they were finally returning to their cold kingdom. He stood on the balcony and looked at the moon, enjoying the warm spring breeze. Hayes stood waiting in front of a large distillation unit from which the elixir flowed, drop by drop, into a jar. This time, thanks to the herbal mixing bug, the potion-making skill increased to level 35. As a reward for completing production level 30, they were able to gain knowledge about automation of the production process and technology for the production of medium-strength potions. Arcanace presented a vial of red liquid to the motley crowd. Using 5,000 gold and 10 Krivia crystals per day, produces 24 vials of medicine. If you take 39 gold for each, the net profit will be over 900 gold. Abila studied the glowing purple crystal with great curiosity. The medicine can only be purchased in the Kingdom of Heroes, so monster hunters can freely hunt in the Nightmare Forest. Thus, the production of crystals and crivia has increased and losses from monsters have become much less. Foreign traders discussed the hero's medicine. The scientists studied information about the medicine. These traders, having heard enough stories about medicine and crystals, began to come to the kingdom for additional profit. All these points together meant that at the moment, only good events began to happen in Crivia, surpassing even the hero's plans. The medicine became the starting point, and his achievements began to accumulate. And the mainland began to slowly recognize the name of Crivia. The horse galloped through the snow. Isabel meticulously asked the hero where he was going alone, adding that he knows that he is going to a place where there is not a soul and only a cold wind. In horror, she raised her clawed hand to her face, suggesting that the hero was about to commit suicide and began shouting to her fiancé that this was impossible. She told him that he looked his best, and she didn't want him to become a ghost. Jared looked at the demon and said that he did not understand what she was talking about, saying that he was going after the monster Dayluck to catch him and asked the demon not to throw words thoughtlessly. Isabella howled and said that this scared her even more and called the hero crazy. Jared calmly looked forward while the face of the demon indignantly spoke to the hero in the ear that the Lick was a strong dark magician who had been cursed, and if the hero was captured, they would take away his soul and he would become an undead. Jared smiled and doubted that Dayluck would be able to defeat him because the hero knows everything, starting with the method of attack. A tall skeleton in a dark robe and with a pile of skulls instead of a body sat on a throne. His name was Dayluck. He was a Lick who lives in a shelter he created, a huge black silhouette with a glowing purple rune hung over the forest. In the game Paradiso, he was chosen by the Demon King himself and freed from refuge during the Great War of the Host, so he gained eternal life. During the main story of the game, all users had to go to a special part called Wrath of the Lick Daluka. Jared galloped through the snow and thought that if Dalek became stronger, then neither the sword nor the magic would act on him, which is why it was impossible to delay his destruction, remembering that he could be killed by divine power. Isabella frowned and said that Jared was very strange. She frowned even more while the hero began to laugh because she said that he knew too much, and that he might be a god or a monster from another world. Just pretending to be human, a huge ice palace appeared among the high rocks in front of the heroes. Sharp cave stalactites hung menacingly as the heroes tried to figure out where the entrance was. Jared sat on his knee and felt the wall. Next to him hung a small beam of light, illuminating the space and the head of a demon. The hero said that there was a very small gap in the wall that was difficult to find, and assumed that it could disappear when the game became a reality. Isabella giggled, saying that Jared was like a puppy looking for his bone. Isabella once again asked irritably if he was really going to catch the Lick. Jared said that it wasn't added that in order to climb inside to Luke's shelter, you need to climb inside a high mountain. Inside this mountain of heroes, many traps awaited the heroes, as Jared said, adding that even he could not cope with them alone. At the entrance stood many frozen corpses, pierced by spears and arrows. The hero's hand began to glow red and passed through the wall. Jared climbed through the wall, which angered the demon. The satisfied hero crawled back out and said that there was a secret entrance. Isabella looked with curiosity at the hero, who noted that this was another bug that he had personally discovered. He imagined a diagram of the Lick's hideout and suggested that most likely an invisible passage had appeared on the map. Thanks to this, there was a way to defeat the Lick. The heroes found themselves in a room sparkling with treasures. Jared told the demon, "Welcome to the Lick's secret room." The couple looked at the mountains of treasures in admiration. Isabella asked if these were all the treasures. Jared said with a smile that this is a reward for defeating the Lick, designed for a large group of people, and therefore it is natural that there are so many treasures in the room. Adding that along with them, there are more than 10 artifacts. He walked up to the shelf with artifacts and said what he had found. In his hands he held a ring. Instead of a stone in which his lips were inlaid, he said that the greedy prankster melted. The hero put on the ring and said that this is not just a ring. The lips on the ring parted and a golden tongue fell out. All the treasures began to be sucked into the ring with unprecedented force, while the hero explained that this is a spatial bag capable of expanding without restrictions. Isabella looked at the hero with displeasure, saying that she was not sure that it was possible to steal the Lick's things like that, adding that although she herself was an evil spirit, she could not defeat the undead. Without being distracted from the matter, Jared asked what it meant to steal, saying that all these things were taken from all the people he killed. He pointed to the spirit and said that they must, on behalf of all these people, punish him. Notification blocks reported on received artifacts and leveling up of skills. The spirit asked if the hero liked all this. In the huge throne room, there was a throne and someone was tied to it with glowing chains. A pale, thin hand rose with difficulty. It was wearing luminous shackles. A gray-haired old man with a long beard, whose name was Daluke, was chained to the throne. He said that because of that damn ant, he had lost a vessel of vitality and therefore could not even free himself and get up from this throne. Chains bulged on his face. He said that if only he could free himself, he would make all the people on the mainland undead and make them suffer forever. He put his hand on his knee and heard someone tell him that if such an old man sat on a chair, he would better think about his behavior. Otherwise, he was spinning vile thoughts. The Luck looked at the hero who appeared, who put his hand on his head and asked who he was. A flame began to flare up under the hero's hand, and he asked in response, "Like who?" A powerful stream of flames shot out from his hand and began to incinerate the Lick. Jared calmly looked at the flame and said that he is the one who will become the main hero in this world. The entire throne was shrouded in black smoke and flames. An alien voice said that it would ask the question differently. The flame burned the skin on the Lick, revealing his bony face and an eye on his chest. His empty eye sockets burned with flames, and he asked where such trash came from and asked how he managed to bypass its magic and traps. The dies showed artifacts and a description of their properties. Jared jumped to the middle of the throne room. The Lick smiled. The flames burned off him. His insides glowed purple. He was a cursed magician who received monstrous powers that violated any laws of this world in exchange for his humanity. Purple smoke rose from an anthropomorphic dark goblet with an eye. Magicians like the Lick are able to create their own image and fill it with powerful magic. This image is controlled by the wizard's thoughts and can operate remotely from his real body. Glowing chains bound the darkness. The Luck lost this vessel of life force because of one sacred maiden. Now his soul was locked in his body. Now he is very weak, and if he dies, he will not be able to resurrect. Jared launched several magical projectiles and quickly began to close the distance. He believed that you just need to be careful and keep your distance so that the Lick cannot use dark magic, which allows him to drain the life force of the victim. The Lick extended his hand and a glowing pentagram appeared near it, forming an energy ball. Jared dodged exploding purple projectiles and his weapon accumulated an electrical charge. He noted that he had already fought the magician several times after he was freed. Electric arrows formed under the hero's palm. They flew in an arc towards the magician. The Lick put a red net in front of him, which reflected the arrows and said that this was low-level magic. Other blue projectiles quickly flew towards the magician. They hit him in the head. He looked at the hero and was surprised at the continuity of the attack, and said that in this case the hero would need a lot of magic. He was surprised by the enormous power, deciding that it looked like third-grade magic. In some places the Lick burned with white flames. He noted that he felt the divine power of eternal fire in his body. He noticed the glowing ring on the hero's finger. Surprised, Lick looked at the hero and could not understand how he could end up in his vault. The Lick began to form a huge beam of purple energy in front of him. Noting that all this was strange, but he could not hesitate. Red fragments flew everywhere. Jared asked why. He cut the magician's defense, and with it a beam of energy, a fireball burned in his left hand. He said that he came to visit, and besides, he was younger than him, and told him to look after him longer. There was an explosion near the throne, and Jared jumped to the side. He smiled and looked back, noting that the continuous attack to block the Dark Wizard's magic was working. He took a fighting stance. His club began to accumulate a projectile. He said that even if he could not finish him with one blow, if he continued at this pace, he would win. The Lick sat engulfed in fire, thinking to himself that Jared knew him so well, as if he could see right through him, and said that this was his territory. Skeletal monsters and armor emerged from the ground. While the monsters were rising from the ground, the Lick shouted that an invader had broken into the kingdom and ordered his path to be blocked. Frightened, Isabella began to scream that the undead had appeared in the darkness. The eyes of the undead glowed purple. Jared thought that the creatures must be where the traps were, and assumed that the pattern could have changed after his revival. The Lick leaned forward and thanked him for the aforementioned suffering and offered to fight properly, since he had extinguished the divine fire. Jared took off. He flew through the army of the undead, and understood that until the Luck began to use high-level magic, he must be blocked no matter what. Isabella looked at the approaching monster and said to entrust them to her. The creature's face was pierced by a red beam. The monster is stuck. He turned around, his mouth and eyes glowing with the red light of the spirit. The companions howled in fear. The largest monster began to cut apart the entire army of the magician with one blow, laughing and noting that the new appearance was so but strong. The Lick extinguished the flames within himself, but a moment later it lit up again and began to create a pentagram aimed at the spirit. He shouted where the little demon was going. The body of a huge monster was torn into pieces. Jared praised the spirit emphatically. He threw a huge electric spear. The Lick was struck by electricity. A new blue cloud of energy formed at the hero's staff, and he shouted that another attack would follow. Pierced by the spear, the Lick erected a dark protective wall into which the projectile crashed. He shouted that he would not lose a second time. The wall in front of the magician began to collapse, and reflections of the projectile began to appear through the darkness. The body was pierced by a new electrical projectile. The surprised Lick exclaimed those two spells followed at once. Jared smiled, illuminated by the electric flash, and said that double magic was his trick and asked what does that mean, he won't lose. He pulled the ring forward, and it began to glow. A yellow projectile began to come out of the hero's staff. The hero, putting the property of holiness into the attack, said that when he played, the lick also constantly lost to these lightning bolts. The screaming lick lit up with a yellow glow. The skeleton's hand went limp. A chained skeleton remained sitting on the throne, steam rising from it. A giant skeleton approached the hero and asked if they had really defeated the dark magician. Jared walked up to the limp skeleton. He looked at the dead magician while Isabella screamed that it was all thanks to her. Suddenly, the skeleton's hand rushed towards the hero. The skeleton reached out to the hero. It glowed purple, and his hand was covered with purple flesh. He shouted, "Die." Jared hit the skeleton's head with his staff. The skull split into several pieces. The hero's eyes glowed red. He used the spiritual eye and said that he knew that he would not throw away his skates. The skeleton raised its head. Jared began to use the treatment, investing in it the quality of holiness. He pointed his hand at the skeleton, and it began to glow yellow and scream. The lick screamed. Holy flames came out of his eyes. He asked if this was his death. Jared, his eyes glowing, continued to cast the spell as the lick thought about the fact that he felt the fear of death for the first time since becoming himself. His instinct told him to avoid the guy, but the bonds made him unable to move. The mad lick refused to accept death. He screamed, and a huge pillar of dark and violet flame covered him. He shouted that he himself was the lick, a dark magician who spreads plague and rules over death. He screamed, and the chains began to glow purple. He called himself the lick. With renewed vigor, all shining with darkness, he invited the hero to fight again. Jared looked at the dark magician gloomily. The entire throne room was filled with purple explosions. The lick's eye shone. Tendrils of darkness flew from the throne towards the hero. He covered himself with a blue barrier. Jared pulled his staff forward. The blue field was enveloped in darkness. With difficulty, he restrained it and thought that the flow of magic was just gushing, saying that it could hardly be called magic. The protective barrier cracked, and the hero began to hide from the darkness. The lick's eyes sparkled with mad excitement. With a cry of "die," a new stream of energy flew at the hero. Jared recoiled in fear. The giant skeleton repelled the attack. The lick, burning with darkness, exclaimed that he had been thwarted again. Purple hands headed towards the skeleton. The skeleton's body was destroyed. Isabella flew up to the tired hero and said that she could no longer do it and asked if they could destroy this monster. Jared smiled, sweating, and said that he had already said that the luck would never beat him. He rushed towards the throne, thinking that at first he was a little confused by the sight and method of his attack, but noted that his basic techniques had not changed. Jared remembered what his hero looked like in Paradiso, and said that this boss appeared in this game more than anyone else, and that's why he knows everything about him. He rushed towards the throne while clots of energy missed him. He knew all its methods of attack, defense, and more. The lick screamed, called the hero a fleet-footed beetle, and shouted, "Die." The shadow of a huge hand hung over the serious hero. Jared noted that this was the right time. He suddenly stopped and a black hand pierced the floor, missing him. The lick glared at the hero and was surprised how he stopped at such a moment. Jared looked out from behind his hand with a smile and said that if you have confidence, then it's easy to challenge. The lick leaned over and asked the question. The hero does nothing but dodge. Is he really so sure that he can crush him? Jared teleported and appeared in front of the lick and answered with a smile. Of course. Jared grabbed the chains and pressed the yellow glowing staff towards the lick. The lick exclaimed that it was 4th grade magic and asked if he deliberately used low-grade magic to trick him, to which Jared replied with a smile that he was confident in himself. He clenched the chains into a fist on which a golden ring glowed and added that he was 100% confident in himself. The chains began to shine even more, and the magic of the Holy Seal chains intensified. The lick screamed and groaned, while the hero said that it was more convenient to capture shapeless guys because it was enough to seal them with a sacred object. Jared hit the lick and told him to feel the divine blessing throughout his body. The sacred ring ended up inside the lick's entrails. The hero added a new property of holiness. The lick's face was pierced from within by a bright light. The entire throne room was engulfed in light. All that was left was smoke. Jared calmly looked at the lick while Isabella hid behind him. He said that the demon king that the lick was waiting for would not come and told him to give up. A black puddle and a piece of the skull's eye socket remained on the destroyed platform of the throne, but the lick was still alive. He said that giving up is not an activity for him, and asked if the hero knows what future awaits him. The fire still burning in the empty eye socket. He asked if the hero really thought he could cope. Jared just threw up his hands and said that this was still far away, saying that the 9th class of magical abilities can be called the real end, and he only has 4. The lick said that the hero knows everything. He sat calmly and died. He asked what do you need from him, and asked where the hero is looking. The hero said the strongest monarch on the mainland. For a moment the Lick's mask fell silent. He started laughing and asking if the hero was playing children's games, and he said that what the hero wants to get is a cup filled with blood, and said that what the hero wants none of the outstanding kings, beloved by the deities and even the cruel demon king, could achieve. The darkness began to recede, revealing the hidden bracelet under the skull. He said that he would watch the hero from hell. Isabella looked at the hero and said that at such moments he thinks too much, adding that the world is full of those who are much stronger than him. But he doesn't care about that. Jared calmly reached out and said that the Lick had finally disappeared, and Isabel added that the hero seemed to know that he could rise so high. Jared took the bracelet and looked at it with an all-seeing eye and said that he needed a bracelet, and it turned out to be even better than he imagined, and said that it was like an artifact of growth. He began to rub his cheek lovingly against it while Isabella behind her saw a book lying on the floor. Jared said that now there is nothing better for him than this, and he did the right thing by coming. Isabella shouted to the turning hero that there was some strange book here. He picked up the purple book, while Isabel suggested that the Lick could have left this book after death, while the hero thought that he had never picked up anything similar to DeLuca's books. The book was called the Resurrection Spellbook. Isabella began to read the text of the book, while a smiling Jared only confirmed what was written. She read that the object of resurrection cannot refuse the wishes of the caster, and becomes his subordinate. If he refuses, he will not only die but disappear forever. Isabel, wearing glasses, hit the book and said that this was already some kind of slavery. He threw the book away in a rage, and said that this was not the kind of relationship she wanted, and asked what the hero was going to order her. Jared raised his finger and said that first he needed to tie it up, which definitely surprised the spirit. Jared raised the second finger and said that she should use a curse on him, and he would endure it. To which an embarrassed Isabella asked if he was really a fan of this, to which I received a negative answer. Jared raised a third finger and said that by repeating the spell, the strength of resistance and stability would increase, adding that in general for this it would be necessary to hire a strong spellcaster. But it was too expensive and Isabella would do it for free. Isabella frowned and thought that she had found his flaw for the first time, to which the hero asked not to look at him like that. She folded her arms across her chest and asked if that was all. Jared smiled playfully and said that he would think about something else. Isabella sighed, and said that she accepted it, and added that she was tired of living the life of an evil spirit anyway. The heroes began to move away from the remaining fragment of the Lick's eye socket, while Jared said that he had found a body for resurrection, to which Isabella asked to wait. Jared exhaled and asked what it was. He carried a girl with red eyes and asked if he really had to carry her. Isabella said that it was still difficult for her to get used to the new body, and asked to call her Isabella. Jared and Isabella shouted at each other. The hero asked why the girl didn't like her name, to which she demanded to go faster. The wreath swelled on her face and said that even his perverted tastes are similar to DeLuca and there are no suitable clothes. Jared exhaled and asked if she was becoming more emotional, and I thought that it was good. Of course that she had the same indicators, but her character had not changed. Ahead of the heroes was a cave with a bunch of ancient corpses. Isabel turned around and asked if there really were that many corpses here, and Jared replied that this was a trap zone and added that he had neutralized everything and so they could relax. The girl was silent. She remembered how they looked at the body of the girl in the technological flask. She asked how this girl died, to which the hero replied that he had no idea, and this made her laugh. She looked at the girl's deathly calm face and thought about how she wouldn't become an evil spirit, because such a life makes you very tired. There are no feelings, but it's cold and lonely. She suddenly perked up and suggested that the girl might even be grateful to her if she lived a decent life in her body. She happily spread her arms and legs while Jared asked why such conclusions. Isabel said that she would eat goodies, wear makeup and beautiful clothes, and live an interesting life. She playfully put her hands on the hero's shoulders and asked if it would be interesting to be with him. Jared calmly replied that yes, it would be interesting, and at times even dangerous. She clung to his back, closed her eyes and said that it was so good, to which Jared smiled and said that he was also glad that he had a good partner. Isabel smiled silently and lay on the hero's back. The cat analyzed the loot and acquired skills after the foray to the Lick. The mustachioed man was angry that they had lost more hunters in their region. A guy stood in front of him and said that yes, since the cure for Ronella could only be found in Krivia, it became the main element of their emigration. The man shouted that this is why they spent a fortune to hire people and steal the recipe for the medicine. The guy looked away guiltily and said that unfortunately it seemed that Trivia had made it a priority to not let this information leak. Although they managed to get a few samples of the medicine, the process of recreating the formula was too complicated. The man furiously started pointing his finger at the guy and shouted how dare he say this with such a calm face. He asked why the hell he hired this guy in the first place. The guy was thrown out of the room by throwing books. The man was left alone, leaning on the table on which everything was turned upside down. He said that Jared was a bastard and that he was pretending to be someone and that he did not understand how this world worked. The veins on the man's face popped out and he said that two could play this game. Horgus sat surrounded by smoke with a young girl sitting on his lap. He looked ahead and asked how many lives could they give up if they declared war right now. In front of him, a hooded envoy sat on one knee. He replied that currently 1239 trained fighters were at the complete disposal of the master. Horgus rubbed his chin and said that this was still not enough, and asked the unknown man what he thought. Didn't they need even more people? He added that he knew that Jared was a class 4 spellcaster. He said that he was no longer the fat pig he knew, and added that he should have asked Gragas to poison him while he had the chance. An unknown man sat behind bars while someone stood opposite with a bloody knife. Horgus asked what happened to Gragas. The unknown man replied that the assassin had been sent by Sir Perua to silence him. Horgus continued to sit on the large chair. Someone announced that the Majorca's chief advisor had arrived. Horgus replied that he was finally here. A white-haired guy with glasses and a hood and a big-eyed staff stood and smiled, saying that he was glad to see his sir in good health. His name was Akron. Horgus approached the crowd while the wizard pointed to the hooded people and said that he had brought those spellcasters that Horgus had ordered, and added that it had cost a lot of money. Horgus replied that money is not an issue. Horgus put his hands on the hooded man's shoulders and asked what class of caster he was. The unknown person replied that it was the 3rd. Akron smiled and said that if they attacked immediately, Krivia would be wiped off the face of the earth. Horgus smiled madly and said it was perfect forest and country path. Abila turned to his master and said that he was aware of his efforts to spread his influence through diplomacy, but were not these forests adjacent to the northern border? The harness detachment moved along the cliff. Abila asked if this was anyone's territory at all. He added that this place borders Majorca and Ranella, which are constantly fighting over it. Jared calmly replied that this was an unofficial visit, and that they were here to make a deal with the local tribe. Abila looked questioningly at the hero and asked if elves inhabit these forests. Jared looked ahead, holding the horse's reins, and said that they would soon find out. Unknown creatures watched the squad from above. Hiding behind the stones, Abaya noticed someone else's presence and asked what it was. Small armed red goblins began to run down the ledge towards the party. Auburn chuckled, saying that he thought they were alone in these parts. However, the squad found itself completely surrounded by goblins. The commander shouted to the soldiers not to yawn and began to defend the master. Lackeys ordered the establishment of a defensive formation and gave the command not to engage in battle with the goblins. The soldiers looked at each other. Abila looked at the goblin squad in bewilderment and did not understand why. It was needed. Someone turned to people. The tallest goblin in a white robe and jewelry came out through the rows of goblins. He said, "Welcome to their lands." He calmly looked at the people and introduced himself as Ibaniba, the leader of the goblins. The old man was surprised that this was a goblin who could speak the Nasu dialect. Jared walked up to the goblin leader, put his hand on his chest, and said that he was glad to meet him and introduced himself. The goblin said that Jared had exceeded all his expectations and asked what was the reason for organizing this whole meeting. Ibaniba smiled. Jared said that they wanted to establish diplomatic relations to acquire gold and iron from the goblins, to which the goblin replied that this was the first time in his long life that a person was the first to extend his hand to them. Jared turned to the sitting soldier and said to get it, when Ibaniba asked what he had that could satisfy them. Abila looked furiously at the cart of crystals and said that this was nonsense. Jared smiled. Behind him were boxes filled with magic stones. He said that they were nightmare stones, and asked if this would be enough to satisfy the needs of the goblins. Abila and other companions were surprised that this was the most common resource from the Forest of Nightmares, and said that this stone was worth nothing. Lackey stood with his hands folded on his chest, and thought that the nightmare stones were beautiful stones that hunters bring from the Forest of Nightmares. It might turn out that the goblins would consider the gift of these stones an insult due to their extremely low costs. Ibaniba calmly examined the stone in his hands, and said that it seems that people have quite a lot of them. He angrily shouted that none of the people had even looked in their direction before, and now they were bringing these stones to meet them. Abila and the others waited in shock for the continuation. Ibaniba smiled and said that he liked it, and they did a good job. The leader of the goblins shook the hero's hand with a smile and thanked him for coming such a long way to present them with these beautiful stones. He began to sign the paper. Jared and Ibaniba hugged, and he said that this made them brothers of the North. Jared looked at the goblin and said that he hoped that their relationship would become even stronger over time, to which he received a reciprocal response. Embatabi joyfully ordered to drag iron and gold. The goblins quickly carried large sacks on their backs. Gold and silver bars sparkled in the open bags. People looked in shock at the pile of metal. Ibaneva lovingly looked at the Stone of Nightmares and said that not a single stone in the world could compare with this in beauty, and the goblin standing next to him said that his heart was jumping out of his chest just thinking about how he will polish these stones. The man held a gold bar and frowned. He thought that he could not imagine that goblins possessed such an unimaginable amount of ores. Sweat ran down his face as he thought about what would be a better idea to take over this land. The goblins rejoiced, and Manhwa said that they could not let the newly acquired brothers go without a celebration and suggested celebrating. He looked away and said that, moreover, they no longer needed their protection so they could go out. Armed dark elves appeared among the trees. The man was surprised by the presence of such a hostile race. The fatal thought was that most likely the gentleman knew about this too. Jared looked at the man and noted the fact that there was a race that lived even further north than the goblins, and that they could not simply ignore them, despite the fact that their peoples barely communicate. Jared presented a diagram where Krivia was below. Hunters were fighting monsters above. Red goblins lived above them, and dark elves were even higher above them. The goblins have a close relationship with the dark elves of the Isle of Tatar, which automatically makes them part of the agreement. A large snow ogre appeared with a humanoid werewolf. Manhwa is known as a sage with many connections to a wide variety of tribes. Manhwa smiled, spreading his arms. Behind him were goblins, dark elves, and ice creatures. He said that although their cultures are different, they should not let this stop them from having fun together. If people thoughtlessly rushed to attack these goblins, then no one would ever find their bodies. A big fire was burning. Jared and Abila smiled and drank. He said, "Who would have thought that nightmare stones for goblins are like gold for us?" and asked the hero where he could get this information. Representatives of different races drank, ate, and were merry. A man competed with all his might with a calm elf in arm wrestling. Jared turned to the head of security. The table was filled to capacity with various goodies. Jared asked what is the current state of the army and the forges. Lackeys replied that due to a lack of materials, they were forced to abandon the supply of weapons to recruits and concentrate on repairing and improving existing weapons. Jared looked gloomily at the head of security and said that once they received the iron from the red goblins, they would need to concentrate on mass production of spears, swords, and arrows. Lackeys bowed after saying that not a single ingot should remain untouched. Jared continued to say that some of the gold should also be used to strengthen the army, and from now on Lackeys is appointed as the head of the conscription. The drinking Ivanova suddenly asked if Krivia was planning to declare war on Mallorca. He smiled and said that it could not be that such a big deal was not made for the sake of preparing for war. He asked if he was right. He carefully took a bite of the grapes from the bunch and said that this was a smart move. Because Mallorca is a hotbed of corruption, rotten to the very core, and sooner or later it will infect your kingdom. Jared excitedly began to apologize for the fact that the goblin might have been offended by the main purpose of the deal. Manhwa began to wave his hand reassuringly, and told Jared not to worry because he was only talking to support their conversation. The goblin put his hand on the hero's shoulder and said that such a piece of iron and gold was not of great value to his people, and added that he personally could not tolerate Horgus and would root for them. Manhwa jumped up glass in hand and proposed, "Toast to their new brother and to the prosperity of Krivia." Everyone joyfully raised their glasses. Jared smiled sheepishly as everyone cheered, and he took a very gloomy sip of his glass. A mansion among snowy mountains. Knight's territory, March 14th, 1414. 4 weeks have passed since Isabel was resurrected. Jared imagined Hayes smiling at Isabel in a beautiful dress, saying that this was just her classmate from her days at the Desmond Empire Academy. As Jared had expected, Isabel had no trouble adjusting to life on the estate. Isabel directed a stream of red energy through her finger into the hero, who was holding his head in horror and screaming like a spider as she began to help him in daily pumping up his resistance. Isabel frowned at the hero, who was very afraid of spiders, noting that they were not that scary. Thanks to Isabel, the hero's magical resistance increased to 34 points. Isabel held the candy in her hand, asking what it was. The couple stood facing each other, and Isabel asked if Jared really wanted her to get fat. Jared scratched his sweaty face and said that this was just a small gift in honor of a small anniversary, adding that today was a special day when guys usually give candy to girls. Isabel squeezed the sweets into her fist in bewilderment, and said that she didn't remember that today was a special day. The hero just waved his hand and said that this was only true according to the Eastern calendar. He thought that in his previous life today would have been a White Day celebration. Isabel flirtatiously twirled her locks of hair. A blush appeared on her face. Jared said that a month ago, on February 14th, there was a day when women decided to give chocolate to men. Today, on the contrary, it is customary for men to give sweets to girls. Isabel said that it sounded quite romantic, and that it sounded like he was starting to realize feelings for her. Jared, with a straight face, replied that he had already given candy to every girl in the estate. Isabel opened the candy, sniffed, and popped the candy into her mouth, saying that he was funny and that he used people left and right, and that he treated them like tools. She grabbed the hero by the neck and reached out to him for a kiss while he tried to hold her. Both smiled madly, and the girl asked if the hero didn't know that their lives were now intertwined with a spiritual eye, and the agreement was forever sealed with their kiss. Jared responded that it sounded strangely like a prenuptial agreement when she talked about it like that. He hovered over the girl and put his finger on her lips, making her feel embarrassed. He told her not to play with fate. He walked away and turned around and said that now that they had significantly increased their magical resistance, it was worth moving on to stronger curses, to which Isabel, with a full cheek, displeasedly said that he could just continue to ignore her. Isabel smiled wickedly and said they could start with a sex drive spell. Jared turned around in horror. The hero was engulfed in red, passionate smoke. With all his might, he shouted no, but the girl said that she could not accept such an answer. A heart-shaped cloud rose up. The notice stated that the minimum educational requirements for reaching 5th grade had been met. Education project. The goal of the project is to find the best talent of the future and recruit them before others get to them. Jared sat in the library and wrote. Plus, there are many other reasons why Jared is putting so much into this project. He looked joyfully at the window, forgetting another point. One of the main reasons is the priest education system, which allows the teacher to receive stat points depending on the progress of up to 4 students. So far, Isabel has shown the best result. She was surprised by the word student, actually considering herself a slave. Lena, all bruised, screamed that since the gentleman himself would be her teacher, along with additional teacher lackeys, then she would give it her all. Lena gratefully accepted the tasks assigned to her. Mia tried to create an energy ball with a smile, saying that the exercises shown to her were very fun. She treated the training like a game. Jared thought about it. The tricks that Jared has picked up over the years have helped him develop optimal training programs that do not interfere with the execution of other plans. At least that's what he thought. He turned his attention in surprise when Hayes called him. The girl stood in front of him embarrassedly and asked how an ordinary maid could call him a teacher, and said that she couldn't do it. The hero got into trouble here. He stood in front of her as she said that even if that was the case, she would do everything she could to become the best healer in the world. Hake's progress was 0. She puffed up and tried to create a spell, a small beam of green light glowing between her hands. Unlike the cleric, the healer is a class that specializes exclusively in healing magic. The bunch still didn't grow. The healer is the highest class whose representatives on the Nasu mainland are no more than 5 people. Jared closed his eyes in annoyance, thinking that maybe that was the whole reason. He began to furiously tug at her ponytail, scolding her for still seeing herself as an ordinary maid. There was a lamp on the table next to the chest. Jared held a cup of tea in his hands and said that in order to awaken the healer in herself, Hayes must be ready for this, both body and soul. Auburn drank tea next to him and said that since her birth 23 years ago, she was only a maid, and she doesn't know anything else. It won't be easy. Jared looked down and said that Auburn was right. It seemed like something was holding her back inside, like she was subconsciously ready for failure. He put his hand to his forehead and said that he should lead Hayes the right way. But what exactly should he do to do this? Auburn thought about it. He put down the cup and turned to the gentleman. He raised his hand and said that he had repeatedly demonstrated unmatched intelligence in the most difficult of situations, and they were extremely grateful for everything he had done for them. Hayes worked while Isabel looked after her. And Auburn continued that the hero should not always rely only on himself. Until now, Hayes had always given all of herself to serve the hero, and so he asked him to just rely on her. Jared looked at the old man in surprise as he said that a hero is a man after all. Jared smiled and said the old man was right. He opened the door and shouted thank you. The hero ran through the corridors and thought that everything was right. He smiled and couldn't understand why he hadn't thought of this before. He thought that Hayes was not like everyone else, and all he had to do was be professional about it. Jared ran excitedly, but an unknown hooded man appeared behind him, throwing a punch. Alarmed, Hayes shouted. "Mister," there was a scream. The hero's bloody body lay on the floor of the corridor. She stood opposite the body. A soldier stood next to her, and in a trembling voice, she asked who did this. The soldier replied that the killer took the gentleman by surprise. They called a doctor, but the situation was critical. Hayes looked at the body with horror in her eyes, saying that they needed to cure it. The body with many wounds lay and did not move. She understood that the doctors would not get there in time. Tears pooling in the corners of her eyes. Hayes told herself that she was a healer, and that she had to do this. She fell to her knees in front of the hero. She wiped her face with her hand. She put her hands forward. Green beams of light began to appear between her palms. Hayes' blood-stained face was covered in tears. She begged and begged for this to happen. The lights near the hands began to go out. All the memories with the master flew before Hayes' eyes. She said that she could not let him die like that. She promised him to always be with him. Hayes' excited face lit up with a green light. A strong stream of green light fell from the girl's hands, which enveloped the body of the dying hero. 30 minutes later, the soldier Jared and the killer sat guiltily and listened to how terrible they were. Hayes cried and screamed that even though it was done to help her, she still couldn't understand how the heroes could do this to her. Jared smiled guiltily and said that only a small incision and a little drop of the animal was used to exaggerate the extent of the damage, and asked what it was like to become a healer. Hayes screamed furiously that this was terrible. The soldiers looked at the floor guiltily, and at the same time said that they were sorry when Hayes scolded them for following such an insidious plan. Hayes walked towards the exit, and said that she hated to see him hurt. She said that when he was hurt, she hurt too. Jared stared after her, confused as Auburn said that this was not what he meant when he said trust her. The parenting project is going just fine. At night, a snowstorm began in the forest. Lackeys made his way through the snow, covering his face with his hand. He was forced to stop because he saw a stranger. A man stood in front of him with a lantern in his hands. The man was surprised at the meeting and recognized the guy calling him little lackeys. There was a steaming cup of tea on the wooden table. It was a surprise to Mr. Olson that little lackeys had grown so much during this time. Lucky embarrassedly said that he was already 40 this year. The man only offered to drink some tea with the skin on. Mr. Olson threw a log into the fireplace and asked what business brought lackeys into this nightmare forest. The guy looked away and replied that he had been thinking about Mr. Olson a lot lately, so he took a gift with him. He put a glass bottle of potion on the table and explained that this medicine was from Ronella, and that for those who live in the nightmare forest, such medicine is a necessary thing. Mr. Olson closed his eyes and asked if this was the medicine that there were so many rumors about. He straightened the logs in the fireplace and said that he heard what people were talking about, and that he had a question. Was it all thanks to that stupid king? Lackeys replied seriously that His Majesty Jared repented of his past, so he sent him here to persuade the man to return. Mr. Olson burst out laughing because the king abandoned him so easily, and just as easily wants to return him. Lackeys frowned because this was the time when seasoned veterans like Mr. Olson were needed. The man frowned, but if he had seen how Cribia had changed, he would have changed his mind. A headless horse was racing along the road, and on its back sat a rider in a robe with a scythe in his hands. Until now, there have not been so many wars of conquest on the Nars mainland. On the mainland, countless lives disappeared, and a huge number of heads of rulers were cut off. Opposite the riders stood Jared, musing about blood relations, human bonds, and how no one could escape death because of this. Jared's figure towered over the figure of the fortress, and he continued to think about fear and the fact that he could mount the horse of death and rush to the northern edge of the continent. The mug was placed on the table with a thud. Jared smiled and said that the cool beer at Caribbean was still excellent. There was a delicious-smelling fish on the plate. And the king continued that it was because of the proximity to the sea that expensive seafood was so cheap. Isabel rested her head on her hand and asked what the king meant, that there was a terrible oak tree here, and nothing grew. Jared smiled sheepishly and expressed hope that at least this time his pesticides would do some good. Hayes tried to console the king because he himself had made them, so there would definitely be some benefit, to which the king only embarrassedly hoped that her words would turn out to be true. Hayes turned around because she heard someone surprised at how everything was put in order here, starting with the road. The mercenaries were sitting at the next table. One of them said that of course he saw it, and that merchant Icky said that she would become an example and would keep everything around clean and tidy. The other man was surprised that Icky was praised so much, because it was only thanks to the mercenary that the kingdom became better and better. Hayes continued to overhear the mercenaries saying that if there was a cure, a potion, and even full support from the kingdom in case Ronella fell ill, then don't they think that now it would be a good idea to start expanding the territory of Cribia? Isabel and Hayes smiled when one of the mercenaries suggested moving the headquarters of their hunters guild here. Isabel said there was some benefit to exploring the village, and then noticing Jared's gaze, she asked where he was looking. At the next table there was a loud knock of a mug on the table and a satisfied exclamation about how great the beer was here. A girl with red hair and round glasses loudly asked for another glass of beer. She looked back at her neighbor and asked if she needed it too, because the local beer was so cool. Jared stared at her because it was that strange sword warrior, Ella, a famous character who in Paradiso for money, constantly helped the main character in difficult moments. Ella pointed her finger at her neighbor's cheek and asked why she was so unapproachable, because when she liked someone she would at least have to drink a glass of such a drink, to which her neighbor replied that she did not need anything, because alcohol blocks the mind and causes a storm of emotions. Ella stood on the mountain nearby and was in the role of an enemy. This was her flaw, that for money she was ready to help even the devil himself. Jared activated his ability, trying to remember that he had also seen the second girl somewhere. A blue sign appeared above the neighbor's head, which told her that the girl's name was Chloe. She had the ability for absolute concealment of Class S and classic camouflage magic. She answered Ella that you can date someone who doesn't drink right. Jared remembered that Chloe was the Queen of Silence and couldn't understand what she was doing here. The king recalled how Chloe stood over her defeated enemy. Is this the same Chloe who, 5 years after the Great War, at the age of 38, will act as Queen of the Dark Elves? This is a mystical character whose history the developers hid for the purpose of a large-scale patch. Jared couldn't remember Ella ever appearing in the north, and Chloe shouldn't be known at all right now. He whispered to himself that he did not expect to meet such important people in one place, and that if this happened, then he the king smiled like a maniac, set his radar to on, and thought that he could not stand it anymore. His companions were perplexed, but Jared only asked them to continue talking and he stormed off. Ella, taking a sip, did not understand anything when Jared approached her. He asked for forgiveness, but Ella interrupted him because she was not interested in suckers since she was 32 years old. Hayes ran to the stunned king. She apologized to the warriors. Hayes hugged the king and said that he held a high position, being the ruler of Cribia, and that the girls should be more polite. Silence reigned in the hall. The tavern regulars wondered how the king ended up in such a place. Ella clenched her fists and said that the maid had completely lost her fear. Hayes frowned. Ella stood up to her full height and said that she also held a high position, and didn't Hayes think that she was the only position in the world? Now Jared hugged the maid and said peacefully, turning to Ella, that this was probably a little unexpected for the first meeting. But could he ask for one favor? The king stood up so that he was now defending Hayes, and then said that he would pay well. Ella was a little surprised because this was really unexpected for the first meeting, and apologized for her sharp reaction because she thought that he was just an annoying visitor. Jared looked around and suggested they go to a more suitable place. In the room, Jared, Chloe, and Allah were sitting at the table, the latter asking about the amount of 5,000 gold a year and a personal house for teaching a child. Jared clasped his hands and confirmed his words. He would pay in advance, but he would need to sign a contract. Chloe turned to the girl and said that she would do as the teacher said, because no matter where she went, people lived the same way. Ella looked at the king, not understanding why he trusted her. Since Chloe had just become her student, and she herself was new to the north, he didn't know them at all. Jared seriously replied that he doesn't have an iota of trust in them right now. Then he smiled because he trusts the one he pays. The king thought to himself that Ella helps in any matter for money. She will not be able to refuse the amount of 5 billion won. She remembered the defeated girl, who due to her character, could not gain recognition among influential heroes in the future. The mercenary's lips stretched into a smile. She liked it. She took off her glasses and smiled. This was the most tempting offer in recent times. She accepted the condition. Chloe took a sip of tea and thought about where this child was worthy of an investment of 5,000 gold. Night fell over the castle. The problem with the teacher was solved for Lena. Previously, Jared would have fallen asleep by this time. But thanks to the gorgeous necklace hanging around his neck, he did not feel tired at all. He wrote something in a notebook, realizing that he had forgotten a lot of all the countless information about Paradiso. Jared thought dejectedly that he had trouble even remembering Chloe today. The king again imagined himself as a small figure and thought that perhaps, given the development of the kingdom, it would be difficult to write anything about him. Jared imagined a black hand reaching out to him. He wished he could leave notes in Korean so no one could read them. He closed the book with the thought that the book containing all the knowledge about the world, the green book with notes about Paradiso. The weather was fine over the castle. Chloe and Lena were dragging a log. Jared stood with Ella and thought about what a hell of a workout it was. He imagined a pumped-up Lena and hoped that she wouldn't become a pumped-up monster if she continued like this. He looked closely at the girl. Chloe tried no less, but she didn't even break a sweat. Chloe sighed lightly as she ran. Ella happily noted that the world is huge and Lena is not the only talented child. She shook her head because, to be honest, whoever taught Lena before was, to put it mildly, a bad teacher. Jared smiled embarrassedly when he heard from the warrior that she could kill him even with one hand in just 5 seconds, and thought that lackeys at least deserve 5 seconds. Ella looked at Lena with a weapon in her hands and said that even without a worthy teacher, Lena with a high learning speed thanks to magical equipment. The girl stood on the platform among the stone pillars. 4 homing elemental spells were installed on the pillars. One of the pillars released a fireball. Lena took the blow on the shield. Because such training was quite good for training the ability to use a shield, Jared heard a question about how he was able to find the ideal training method for Len. To which he answered, smiling, that this method of training was on the eastern continent. The girl took another blow to the shield, so because of the system, if you use the same training method, then over time the gain in experience will decrease. Impact of the third element on the shield. Since using 4 different elements, the system recognizes them separately. Jared thought that this bug bypassed the type of anti-macro training system. He looked at Elle and was surprised that she knew Len's condition even without using the spirit eye, and that he had nothing to worry about given the effectiveness of the training. Lena took another blow. Farmers inspected their crops. One of the workers saw his boss and greeted him, shouting to the others that their sire had returned. However, Auburn was here only for a routine check, and he was interested in how things were going with the crops. The plants looked healthy. Everything was as usual, so from the moment all the pests were exterminated, everything went like clockwork. One of the workers happily reported that because they had migrated to Renella's territory, their neighbors wanted to learn the secret of growing. Auburn smiled as the people expressed gratitude to him and the Lord for every day that they worked in the fields because it saved them. Auburn was happy to see every farmer praising their Lord, but he wasn't quite sure what to make of it all. But he was grateful to everyone. The farmers cried with happiness. The bell rang and game signs have appeared with inscriptions about the united voices of farmers offering prayers in the name of the king, the completion of the task, sincere gratitude, and the fact that the king receives 200 loyalty points. Next, another game sign appeared, stating that the Golden Age had arrived in the country, and that by achieving the Golden Age within a month, all production-related abilities would increase by 100%. The sun shone brightly above the houses in the city. People in the streets shouted words for the glory and health of their lord. Hayes worked with the rest of the staff to distribute documents and direct where to put what. Chloe and Lena were working hard outside. Jared looked at the game boards and rejoiced in another golden age. The Cribia was immersed in the sun's rays. Walking down the street was a delegation led by Akron, who was saying that he had heard quite a bit about Cribia's welfare lately, but the site was definitely worth dying for, even though they lived in the northern region. Akron, already in the castle, bowed to the king and showed his respect. He grinned, introduced himself, and said that he had come from Majorca to deliver a personal message, and also had the ability to provoke conflict and greed. Game signs appeared in front of Jared, which said that the task wedge with Wedge had been activated, and his opponent was a 4th-class magician. For eliminating him, the king would receive 15 points to wisdom. Jared thought about it. He then smiled and extended his hand to welcome the guest into his home. He immediately inquired whether the previous amount of tribute had satisfied Lord Mallorca. Akron assured that his lord was very pleased, and if we consider the history of the relationship between Mallorca and Cribia, then Lord Jared's decision definitely deserves praise. Jared tensed and thought that the guest was trying to say that they were superior to him because he paid tribute. Lackeys tensed as his king expressed his joy at Lord Mallorca's satisfaction. The Akron guards grinned when the king expressed his desire to see the message. Akron held out the letter and mentioned that it was written personally by the lord. The king began to read the letter, which said that after looking at their relationship, the lord realized how poorly he had treated him in his territory in the past. He thought about it every day. But despite this, the lord dreamed of eternal peace between their vast lands. The lord also suggested continuing to build mutually beneficial relationships. Because great friendship begins with small steps, Jared mentally rolled his eyes and thought that Horgus didn't care about him at all. But he said out loud that he, more than anyone else, dreams of peace between their countries. He looked at Akron and said that he would soon send the best and purest magic crystals in all of Crembia. Besides, he sincerely hoped that this would serve as a confirmation of the friendship between them. Akron smiled. Because who can doubt it? His lord will definitely be happy. Jared smiled friendly and assured that they were welcome at Crivia at any time. The deer started from an unfamiliar rustling sound in the middle of the forest. The archer pulled the bowstring and took aim. The arrow hit the deer directly. The guard screamed that he had been hit. The other guards admired the fact that their lord was also a natural archer and that he was a very versatile person. Jared saluted happily. Lackeys quietly asked the king why he behaved so submissively with these bad people from Majorca. Weren't they going to distance themselves from their influence? To which Jared philosophically replied that while it was true that someone would have to draw a sword when meeting an enemy on the battlefield, then in the political arena, the best solution would be to put on a smile. Lackeys did not understand whether his king really believed that the enemy would become careless and lose concentration if his true intentions were hidden. Jared just put his finger to his lips. He pretended to leave and explained that the best blow is always the last one. You just need to not put too much effort into humiliation or sycophancy during the whole process. Lackeys had to agree. Jared turned to his guards and proposed that they celebrate the rapid development of their province with an incredible feast. The guards supported this proposal. A fire was burning in the forest. The guards ate meat. Jared also enjoyed the meat and told Lackeys that when he finally fully understood their relationship with Majorca, he wouldn't be too worried about war anytime soon, right? Lackeys smiled and expressed hope that maybe the Golden Age had truly arrived on their territory. Many guards drank too much. None of them noticed the stranger. The man smirked as he thought that Jared was rather careless. He grabbed a bundle of firewood and mentally wished to enjoy the holiday while he could. The stranger's smile turned sinister because the next glass the king drinks will be filled with his own blood. Jared looked after the stranger, reading his thoughts. The stranger with the bundle of firewood turned out to be a spy, which was quite natural. Besides, the man was superior, had the skills of thorough investigation using intelligence, and got into character quite well. The king smiled ominously because on the day the spy delivers information, Majorca will immediately go to war against them, and then they will understand who they have contacted. Gurgling sounds were heard in the forest. Lackey supported Jared when he became ill, and he apologized because he should have looked after the lord better. A month after that, April 19, 1414, early morning in Cribia, the clatter of horse hooves and calls to rush forward. One of the army commanders calls for a war against Cribia and the destruction of the enemy. Horgus, wearing the red uniform of a commander-in-chief, smiled bloodthirstily in anticipation. He thought that Cribia would soon become his. The light from the window fell beautifully onto the castle floor. The corridors were empty. There was not a soul in the meeting room. Lana listened to the surrounding situation. She stood on her training field and said that the palace was quite quiet today. She asked Chloe if she knew where everyone had gone and received a negative answer. Ella appeared behind the girl and asked if she allowed her to talk during training. Then the woman ordered the student to run 20 laps around the site, to which she received an affirmative answer from the fleeing Lena. Ella looked through her glasses at the training field and said that Jared should have told her in advance that he would soon start a war. What was he even thinking? She stretched and continued talking to herself about how he really didn't think she needed to get involved. A volley of fire flew into the sky. One of the towers immediately exploded, knocking down the guard. One of the warriors shouted about the sudden attack and the need to retreat. A warrior approached Horgus, who was ordered that the watchtower had been destroyed and the guards needed to be immediately redeployed there, to which the warrior asked whether it was necessary to organize a pursuit detachment. Horgus replied that there was no need to waste time on all the rabble, since they actually only had 1 battalion. He sat on his horse, looked at the burning watchtower, and thought that if he had known that it would be so simple, he would have captured his territory a long time ago. One of the warriors rolled a barrel to the Lord as they had found a large supply of alcohol, which the soldiers stored in barns. But Horgus grinned because the enemy is so pathetic that he does not even know how to distribute supplies. The tip of the blade rushed upward, and an appeal was heard to the brave warriors of Majorca. The Lord's battle cry rang out that they would take what was theirs by right of force. The peasants left the city. The woman was crying and carrying a baby in her arms. The men talked among themselves about how things had been calm yesterday, and that their lord was even worse. Jared stood in front of his warriors. One of the scouts reported that enemy troops had broken through the 4th line of defense. The scout was nervous because given the speed of their movement, the enemies would soon reach their location. The king looked around and realized that they would have to speed up. Lackey stood nearby and listened to the fact that if the enemies break the defense here, they will have nowhere to retreat, so efforts must be made to hold this place. He agreed. Hayes ran to her lord. She was angry and did not understand why she was not taken to this war. She did not want to stay. However, Jared was against it. Hayes tried to object because she has healing magic and can help many, but Jared was adamant because the battlefield is a place where she can lose her life because of the slightest mistake, and it is too dangerous for her to be here. The king took the girl by the hand and said that her ability was incredibly rare. She could be irreplaceable during a war, but he could not take her to a place where he could lose her due to the use of her abilities. Jared squeezed her hand. Tears came to Hai's eyes because she just wanted to use all her strength to help him. The king smiled and asked if she really thought that someone could take a dear person to certain death because this was not the case, and he did not want to lose her. Jared thought back to their childhood and thought about how they had been together their entire lives. He remembered how little Hayes fell and he ran to meet her. So, in order to protect those he loves, he prepared until today. In the memories, little Hayes began to cry, sitting on her knees. Little Jared extended his hand to help her up. He remembered her naive smile, asked her to believe him, and asked if she understood, to which the already adult Hayes actually agreed. Isabel became angry when she saw this touching scene. She clenched her teeth, trying not to curse. Isabel grabbed Hayes by the collar. The demoness scolded the girl for that if she can only heal, that her place is in the rear. Jared waved at them as he heard Isabel tell him not to worry, as she would take care of everything. Jared took the helmet. Now everything was ready. He put the helmet on his head. Scarlet eyes sparkled from the slits. He thought it was time to start now. Green banners fluttered over the rocks. The warriors thought they were in a good position due to their geographical advantage. But they only had 300 fighters. The green banners became closer and thoughts were directed to the fact that there is quite a lot of talent in this military battalion. But this is not enough. Lackeys became more serious. Their detachment consisted of 100 farmers who were not at all suitable for combat operations. He bowed his head and closed his eyes. Then he gathered his courage and began to make a speech to his soldiers about it, that he is grateful from the bottom of his heart to those who responded as soon as they heard the news about the war and the need to help. Lackeys frowned and continued to speak about the truth that he was very ashamed and sorry to put them through this because of the lack of troops. He put his hands behind his back and continued, since everyone already knows that the Lord only wants peace with Majorca and even offered them a truce. But despite all the efforts of their Lord, they still want to capture and subjugate them. Horgus approached the defenders' positions at high speed, leading 1,200 trained soldiers. Lackeys' speech reached its peak when he said that those who are not ready can leave without shame, but it will be a great battle. He remembered himself with a bundle of firewood, his friend urging him to leave together. His friend tried to explain that soon everything in the kingdom would fall apart because the previous king was dead and Jared was too stupid to rule. The firewood fell to the ground with a crash. Lackey sat down next to them and said that he was staying. His friend was angry because even after he was thrown out of work, he can still talk nonsense. He should listen to his friend because Cribia will not survive the coming winter. It will be too harsh. But lackeys did not even turn around when they shouted to him that it was all over, because if so, he would die along with this country. His friend then got angry and left, leaving the man to do what he wanted. In parting, he only said to keep lackeys out of his sight. He was fed up. He remembered how he stood in front of his axe with no understanding of how to survive. His memories were interrupted by people asking him not to talk like that. They shouted that Kribia had always been and would always be theirs, and they would not allow her to be taken away so easily. People also shouted that it was thanks to Lord Kribia that it became the place they deserve. People said that they would not give their land to people from Majorca who are not even responsible for their own words. Lackeys had heard that they would rather die fighting than on the run. Did he mentally turn to his comrade from the past about his words, that this winter would be the coldest? Lackeys was overwhelmed with emotions because his friend was mistaken, since he had never been so hot in his life. He pointed his hand towards the approaching army and ordered his soldiers to issue weapons and armor to the new fighters. A scout came running and reported that the enemy was approaching. Lackeys peered and thought that he could see them from such a distance. The trampling of horses was heard, and the scout reported that unexpected circumstances had emerged. Lackeys tensed. Yellow flags fluttered. Ronella's wars rode on horses. The commander of the troops, Ronella, urged his soldiers forward to crush the army of Kribia a month ago at the Majorca castle. There were two kings sitting in the office who had indeed been arguing with each other for some time, but didn't they have a common goal of protecting their lands? King Ronella was not entirely indifferent on this matter, and at the same time his resentment was not so deep. So let Horgus speak. The king of Majorca asked that King Ronella had recently received money from Kribia, folding his hands in front of him. Reply that he had received enough. They sent a lot of provisions in order to maintain friendly relations, and besides, considering how much gold they sent, he thought that their financial condition was stable. Horgus slammed the table, calling Jared names. He frowned and said that he needed to think about it carefully. He imagined Jared pretending to be a cute cat, and didn't understand why the bad Jared suddenly wagged his tail and became friendly after such a long silence. Horgus imagined the king of Kribia smiling slyly. Because 20% of their guards had fallen, and this figure continued to grow, and besides, Jared was trying to affect their lands. The king of Majorca grinned, deciding that the boy was simply scared. Although their territories were expanding, they were not yet ready. Lord Ronella thought that this was why he was trying to buy a truce with money. Horgus stuck out 3 fingers, saying that he had studied Kribias and they barely had 300 soldiers. Lord Ronella was surprised. Because isn't 300 soldiers too few? Lord Majorca twirled the coin in his hands and said that this was why Jared tried to buy a truce with money. Didn't that sound convincing? He squeezed the coin and said that if Lord Kribia offered more money, they would be satisfied and would not attack. Or so he would think. Horgus remembered that he sent Akron, the scout mage, since they decided to declare their lands allied. Lord Ronella jumped up and surprised that their lands were allied from today. Horgus smiled in evil anticipation as they would prepare for war against Kribias. He threw a coin on the table and continued that a month should be enough to prepare, and then they would strike suddenly. In a fit of emotion, Horgus jumped up and suggested creating a united front to Lord Ronella. Because they should not invade as bad people, it is necessary to crush Jared and his people, to which Lord Ronella agreed to declare an alliance. They shook hands and formed an alliance. Both lords were pleased with each other because being born into an allied force with over 3,000 soldiers may at first glance seem to be a union of common goals, but the two had nothing in common. Horgus thought that Lord Ronella was next. Lord Ronella was thinking about how he would take over the lands of Majorca. Lord Ronella looked at Jared's army and thought about how angry he must be at seeing their unexpected advance. His soldiers lined up in even ranks, and the Lord thought that he couldn't say anything more because Jared's arrogant, barbaric decisions would affect his lifespan. The soldiers were tense because attempts to leave their lord would be in vain. Lord Ronus spread his arms to the sides because while they were talking, the Horgus army surrounded the lands of Kribia. He imagined galloping warriors and thought how stupid it was to distribute his army on the main front, leaving the bypass red, unattended. Lord Ronella rejoiced, thinking of ignorance as a sin, and invited Jared to say goodbye to his lance. He looked at Lord Kribias and said that if they crawled to him on their knees and begged for mercy, then so be it, he would spare them. However, Jared remained silent. Then he took off his helmet. Lord Ronella was dismayed. Under the helmet stood a guy whose build only resembled Lord Kribias, and it was not clear who he was. Scout Majorca spied on the unfolding scene and wondered where Jared had gone. The helmet flew off to the side. The scout hurried to run away from the battlefield, cursing as he went. He thought too much about the fact that it was a trap, and he needed to report to the Lord before it was too late, and then he was hit. The attacker continued to strike. The spy could not dodge. The sword flashed. A green-haired guy leaned over him and whispered contentedly that he really was a spy. The victorious warrior stood over the body of the scout pinned to the ground with a sword and asked the green-haired guy if a person like him, responsible for public order and healthcare, behaved so surprised, then what should they do? The guy chuckled and told the spy that he was the one who allowed Romo's army to invade their lands. The scout clenched his teeth and thought that they even knew his identity, which meant that all the information received was false. The warrior raised his weapon, told the spy to atone for his guilt by death, after which a deafening crash was heard. Jared and Lackey stood on a high ledge and says that if two lands sent a common army to attack, they would choose the main road. Their gaze fell on the country ride. Lackey's thought for a moment and replied that they would have two options. He frowned as it was easy to set up an ambush near the main road. Lackeys imagined Horgus saying that there was a high chance of losing soldiers while the enemy occupied the high ground. Jared was serious when he said that it was true and anyone would notice their geographical superiority, and he also thought that their enemies were planning the same. Lord Ranella looked at Horgus and asked what their last option was, to which Horgus replied that after careful research, he had found a hidden workaround. His scout found his way through the forest. Jared frowned because if the spy was truly talented, then they would find a bypass route, and since he was pretending to be a lumberjack, then he had to study that route carefully. Jared looked at the flat disc he would place as a trap in the nook. An in-game sign flashed up, informing him that it was a Jared landmine, which is a magical device that causes a magic move to overload, and in exchange creates an explosion comparable to a fourth-class mage. Lackeys leaned on the mine and said that he had never seen anything like this and asked to look at his abilities. Jared asked him to stand behind him, to which he did not understand, since when he needed to be protected. A magic ball appeared in the hands of Lord Cribias. The light from the ball streamed along the rope. The magic reached the mine. There was a deafening explosion. Stones and fragments flew in all directions. The earth shot up into the sky. Jared put up a defense. Lackeys found this incredible. Seeing a crater in the ground, he called the mine an exceptional weapon. Jared was serious because with the help of this guy, he would destroy the enemy in one explosion. And in this way, their lands would not turn into a battlefield, because the forest would become a grave for the attackers. The warriors rushed along the roundabout route. The warrior held in his hands a bundle of threads leading to mines that would become a one-way ticket. Horgus rode his horse at full speed. Ekron was right behind him. The king of Majorca urged his soldiers to listen. When they attack Cribia, the soldiers must dismember anyone who resists. He presented the slaves and ordered those who surrendered to be chained. Akron smiled in anticipation, because the beginning of this war would begin their era of wealth and glory. The soldiers, eager to fight, were ordered to raise their weapons. Horgus shouted joyfully that the massacre would soon begin. Jared's voice sounded, saying that now the massacre would really begin. Horgus turned around in surprise. Threads were visible all along the road, and the voice of King Cribias said that Horgus was not mistaken about one thing, that his guys should raise their weapons. The knight in armor ordered the shields to be raised. Power flowed through the threads, and the warriors of Majorca were invited to enjoy the traps. The mines that Jared had been diligently placing began to flicker. The soldiers did not yet understand that a whole network of mines was placed under their feet, which were ready to explode. Akron clenched his teeth nervously. Perspiration appeared on his forehead, and he thought that the mana flowing beneath them was shaking the earth. He shouted to Isaac and Odium to begin defensive magic. The soldiers began to look around in fear. There was a powerful explosion, a pillar of fire and earth shooting up. Stones and fragments pierced through the armor. The warriors were burning alive. Akron managed to put up a shield around himself and several other people. The trees were burning. Smoke obscured my eyes. Lord Ranella looked at the blazing bypass. Drops of sweat were running down his face, and he thought about a huge explosion from the side of the bypass road. He was overcome with fear because now they were the ones who had no advantage. However, he quickly grinned and came to his senses. Behind him there was still an army of 1,800 soldiers, even without Majorca's support. He raised his sword and ordered to grind everyone into powder. The first line of attackers put their halberds forward. The commander of the defenders ordered the tanks to be put forward and hold their positions. Two armies clashed in battle. The black one covered the road. The wounded Corgus rose to one knee, spitting. Akron fearfully asked if everything was all right with his lord, to which Horgus ordered a report on the situation. The magician hesitated. They looked around at the corpses of the soldiers, because except for the 500 soldiers who followed them from behind, everyone was dead. The red banner burned out on the ground. Horgus asked, "What about the two magicians?" The magician replied that Isaac and Odium also died. Horgus gritted his teeth and thought that his situation was catastrophic, since all the soldiers with whom he was supposed to fight against Jared had died. He thought hard that he would never have thought that Jared had such a terrifying weapon, and now he could only rely on Akron, and the rumor asked the magician not to go anywhere far. While he was talking about retreating and meeting with the army, Jared attacked Akron. Horgus shouted the magician's name in fear. Jared rushed upward at full speed, holding the magician by the throat. They soared into the sky at breakneck speed. Jared asked Akron why he was so nervous. The magician only swore that before this, his appearance was only a stage performance. Lord Cribia grinned because his enemy only now realized this. Akron, swearing, asked how far he planned to fly. Jared suddenly released his hand. He said that this was enough and let the magician fall. Akron was now flying down. He picked up speed every moment, screaming in fear. Jared looked down. Then he flew like a bullet after Akron. Jared cast a spell. He gave the magician a choice. Akron can activate flight to prevent himself from falling, or it can create a shield to counter ice storm. Jared sent a spell and offered to make a choice. Akron stuck his hand out, still calling him names, and then he shouted that Jared was crazy. An explanation appeared that usually in a duel of magicians, opponents keep their distance. By exchanging attacks, they reveal the level of strength of the opponent. The following explanation stated that after a long period of mutual exploration and reading of movements, mages bombard each other with chains of furious attacks, which is why duels usually happen like this. Jared hit Akron in mid-flight. He wrapped his arms around him. They flew down together as Jared took common sense and completely ignored it. The magician realized that in this situation he wanted to kill them both. Then he looked down. Akron saw the magic circle and was happy. He chuckled as he understood Jared's intentions. 4th grade 4 dark silhouettes stood against a blue background. After a general examination of all the mage classes, the 4th class is definitely not considered the last. A bald man, steam coming from his mouth, was holding a pale, dark-haired guy by the neck around whom stood 3 people holding their stomachs. Even Horgus, who forcefully filled Majorca's ranks with criminals, spent 1/4 of his fortune hiring 3rd-class magicians to do his job carefully. Several people in gray capes lay dead on the cold ground. The protagonist, lying on the floor, desperately hit him and asked what was wrong with his garbage, fat character, and his body. However, Jared had 2 reasons why he screamed at the sight of himself. An image appeared of a blonde guy with a glowing blue eye, his head shrouded in a golden helmet. In the past, the main character's strength was enough to subdue the reincarnated Lick DeLuca somewhat gladly. The protagonist in his new body closed his eyes. In comparison, a sack like Jared could only use 4th grade magic once. An image of a white-haired man with glasses appeared, smiling slightly madly. But Akron is different. His skills were perfectly balanced, making him an ideal magician since the 4th grade. He clenched his hand into a fist, along which veins ran. Although his fighting skills were not enough, he was on par with Jared in magic. He raised both hands with fury on his face. Akron asked if the protagonist thought he would lose to him. Without changing his face, the guy struck straight with his right hand. The main character, wrapped in armor and surrounded by a blue shield, thought that the shield easily breaks in close combat. Carrying out an attack that shattered the protagonist's defenses in an instant, the white-haired guy sarcastically asked if that was why he approached him. Shards of gray armor scattered. Having received damage, the main character, looking angrily at the guy, sighed in pain. Smiling madly, Akron stated that he had already seen his magic. He instantly soared several tens of meters into the air, using the magic of teleportation, a dimensional portal flying towards the falling Jared. The white-haired guy said that the protagonist wanted to use the fact that he could not use the magic of flight to counter the attacks that would fall on him. The protagonist was going to use this advantage and go through the portal while he was falling to the ground. An image of the protagonist's plan appeared as he flew into the portal and his opponent fell to the ground, continuing to scream madly with his mouth wide open. Akron stated that he thought it was a 4th-class spell, but he couldn't think that the protagonist would be able to cast it. It was impressive. The protagonist, with uncertainty on his face, threw his hands to the sides, falling down. The white-haired guy stated that he was able to recognize his tricks as he approached the purple portal. He stated that due to being hit by his previous attack, the person who would enter the portal would be him. Sticking his palm forward, the protagonist shouted the name of his opponent. Laughing with a victorious smile and creating a fireball between his hands, Akron told the protagonist to just try something. The main character fell onto a newly created 3-meter stream of fire. He also noted that now the choice is his to stop his attack, or stop his fall. Smiling inhumanly and madly, Akron stated that if his flames attacked the protagonist, he would die. His eyes reflected absolute madness. He stated that regardless of the choice, the main character will die. Approaching the fire, the main character continued to keep his hand in front. Jared entered the stream of fire at a moment when there was less than a meter left from the portal to his enemy. Entering the portal, Akron shouted with a crazy face that he had done it, and even if the protagonist survived, he would not be able to use the portal after him. Coming out of the portal and preparing to land, the white-haired guy stated that if it passes, then the moment it appears, he will destroy it with his attacks. Feeling pain, the guy looked around in fear. A dozen bladed weapons coming out of the tree pierced his body. He, looking at the spear, asked with fear and misunderstanding what had happened. Coming out of the portal, the main character, holding his cloak, asked if the guy recognized his tricks. Looking at Akron seriously, Jared stated that he came down to tell him this. The pale guy was shaking in fear. The protagonist said that his face shows that he is completely confused. Covering his eyes and turning his head, the main character said that he was nothing without magic. Pointing his finger at the shocked Akron, the protagonist stated that thanks to his attack, he softened his fall and the guy should not have attacked him while he was at the top. Recalling his attack with an icy blue stream of energy called an ice storm, the protagonist said that, on the other hand, his attack accelerated his fall. Recalling the footage of the destruction of the protagonist's armor under Akron's attack, he stated that he deliberately interfered with his attack, making him the first to pass through the trap portal. An image of dark fog appeared. Jared mentally stated that he saw his plans and weaknesses, which is why he was able to win. Looking calmly at Akron, he stated that people say that if something looks too good to be true, then it is. If something looks too perfect, it probably isn't true or a good possibility. The protagonist also added that he was dancing on his palm from the very beginning. Spitting blood, Akron, through the pain, madly uttered the name of his opponent. The main character, creating a fireball, coldly declared that the white-haired guy who had committed 1,000 evil deeds would learn justice from him and not from his victims. A stream of strong winds spread across the location after a large explosion from the fiery equipment. His dead opponent's glasses fell at Jared's feet. The system alert announced that a new level had been achieved, and also that the neck-and-neck task was completed. 15 wisdom was received as a reward. Looking at the information window, the protagonist asked why the task was called neck and neck. Stepping on his opponent's glasses, he stated that Akron hadn't even touched his robe. The glasses are cracked. The knight spears peeked out from under their shields. Several warriors in beige armor attacked with their weapons. The guys with green shields receiving numerous attacks retreated. The blue-haired girl treated the guy who received an attack to the body with green magic. One of the attacking soldiers, looking at his retreating enemy, shouted for his soldiers to force the enemy out, for soon their defenses would fall. One of the beige-armored soldiers was struck on the head by a sword attack, piercing his helmet. The knight in gray armor, fighting off the attacks, shouted for the soldiers to keep in line. The enemy's spear scratched the guy's face. He told Siracus that they needed more people in the center. Now warriors in beige armor, breaking through the center of the formation and actively attacking the enemy with spears, quickly moved forward. One of the retreating warriors turned around and was shocked. With inhuman smiles, the running warriors in beige armor were ordered to ignore the soldiers and leave ordinary people first. Smiling and laughing madly, one of them declared that after the battle they would fill their pockets with gold and become damn rich. The soldiers who broke through ran forward to a large tent with the wounded. Hayes watched them approach with fear. Throwing a spear forward, one of the soldiers joyfully shouted that they were going to die. A strong and unexpected blow hit his face. His spear fell out, and he himself flew away and fell to the ground. Several of his companions looked around in surprise. As Olsen approached them, he stated that although he said that their military strength was the worst, he did not think that they would be driven out so quickly. The brown-haired guy who had slung his bloody weapon over his shoulder stated that it seemed that after their departure, the Caribbean army had become helpless with a smile. One of the silver-armored soldiers asked why Olsen only came down. Closing his eyes, the man with the scar on his left eye said they kicked Majorca's ass before they came here. The spears of the troop of warriors were raised. The guys in armor looked forward confidently. Introducing the calm and collected protagonist and his father, Olsen appealed to Master Cribia and the great leader Barrett that accompanied by an equally great man, the current leader of Cribia, Jared, they could win. Inserting his sword and standing in front of the huge number of soldiers, the white-haired man stated that they had 100 elite soldiers of Barrett and 900 soldiers of Jared's army further. He, opening his eyes, said that they would all fight side by side. The main character said that the man was doing well all this time. Looking at the protagonist with one eye in surprise, Olsen asked what he meant. The main character, folding his hands, said that he served long and well, but now he is sending him into retirement. Looking at Jared, the man said that the Barrett was the guardian of Cribia, who swore allegiance. Sitting at his desk, the protagonist said that he could not, because his father was not there. Looking up, he said that therefore he would not need his soldiers either. The white-haired man walked out the office door. An image of 2 gold coins appeared, and so Jared fired most of the soldiers. The reason for this was a lack of funds. An image of a gray estate building appeared. Jared was drinking wine with 2 girls at a table of expensive food. For the most part, the lack of funds arose due to the protagonist's lavish spending on personal needs as well as a luxurious life. Vligas, holding a bottle in his hand, looked forward with a confident smile. The parasites then took advantage of the situation and took over Cribia. 4 important figures of the country looked down in frustration. All of Bareth's guards were removed from their positions, and soldiers who received high salaries faced constant reductions, even to the point of dismissal. An image of Olsen appeared, looking around sadly. He and the other veterans did not want to watch the collapse of the Kribolovs they had spent so long building. An image of gray silhouettes appeared, diverging in different directions. Therefore, they decided to live quietly in the forest and separately. There was a snowstorm this winter day. Walking through the snow-covered trees, a blond man with a scar looked around, holding a spear in his hands and walking through the winter forest. He thought that the spring snow was heavy today, and at this rate, he would stop hunting. He saw several living creatures ahead. Low monsters were doing something in the distance. Red monsters were carrying carts of metals. They stopped when they saw the man sticking his spear forward. The man stated that these were goblins, and asked how they got so deep into the forest. The goblin opened his mouth in surprise. The men held a spear and prepared to attack. The goblin put out his palm in fear. Olsen looked calmly at the goblin, appraising him. Surprised, he continued to look at the monsters. Raising his spear, he looked at the calmly leaving monsters. Lowering it and looking into the distance, he stated that they had ignored him. A blacksmith with a brown beard asked about the goblins who carried the iron. Looking at the white-haired man with a smile, he assumed that these were the ingredients they ordered. They recently sold tons of weapons to the military. Turning and closing his eyes, the man in the work cap declared that thanks to the Lord's orders, they worked 24 hours a day. The man noted that this must be tiring. One of the blacksmiths was hitting hot metal with a sledgehammer, sitting at the table and turning towards Olsen. The man said that this of course is tiring, but thanks to this they live like real blacksmiths. Smiling at the work of his colleagues, he declared that with the help of the Lord, he was once again illuminated by the flame of passion. Pointing his finger at the man, he told him to keep it a secret. The weapons they make are delivered secretly. Olsen replied that he didn't even want to know, so it was better that he stopped telling him. He thought that the changes in Kribias were pure luck. An image of a city with densely packed dark white buildings appeared. However, with proper irrigation management, the drought problem was solved. With an improved rod network, the problem of population influx was solved. The treatment of soldiers, the availability of new positions, and the recruitment of new talent were improved. Several warriors in gray armor, holding swords in their hands, actively attacked their enemies. The departed soldiers realized this and returned to military service. They gave Jared a second chance after all the work he did. An image of the protagonist's troops appeared, instantly destroying the knights, cutting them with their blades. These people stood with Jared and dealt with the monster's invasion. They were the best of the best. Scarlet blood flowed down the leaves of the plants. This was the Mallorcan army, and Rana's army simply could not compare with it. Dozens of corpses of beige-armored knights lay behind Olsen. They had incomparable experience and skills. Coldly looking forward, the white-haired man stated that these worthless soldiers did not even dare to look them in the eye. The surrounded guys, kneeling and raising their hands, asked to be spared. A detachment of defeated soldiers ran away shouting about retreat. A man riding a horse told Horgus that he was a fool, and he asked if he couldn't foresee that they would be hiding there. Furiously gritting his teeth, the dark man with a mustache declared that they had created an alliance in Bane. He suggested they just retreat before Jared showed up. One of the warriors on horseback turned around and shouted. Several fleeing warriors in beige armor shouted that it was a magician. A squad of fleeing soldiers, seeing the protagonist above them, shouted that it was him. Gritting his teeth, the guy in the red helmet declared that he had already caught up with them. Approaching the man's face, the protagonist asked with a smile if everything was all right with his lord. The stunned man made an arcing attack with his blade. The main character, who dodged and found himself above the man, stated that he was very weak, putting his hand to his chin. The protagonist suggested that he was stronger than Rakshi's. Looking angrily at the protagonist, the man told him to stop flying. He told him to come down and fight like a man. Grinning and creating a magic circle with his left hand, the protagonist, with a fireball beginning to form above his head, declared that he would go down first. The man's eyes widened in fear. A huge fiery explosion covered the location. One of the warriors, looking at the battle in fear, said that the warriors should protect the Lord. Fiery arrows pierced him, several warriors and horses. The protagonist told them to retreat with a deadly look. The warriors, looking up, backed away slightly in fear. Jared hovered over several corpses. The crippled man stood up, wiping blood from his mouth. The protagonist approaching him stated that from the very beginning he knew about the impossibility of peace. They were simply quietly planning their attack. Gritting his teeth, the man said that this was impossible. A concentrated air attack flew towards his face. He fell to his knees with his head bowed. Receiving several new attacks on the body, the man asked if he wanted to take everything from his lamps. By thrusting his palm forward and attacking, his opponent, the protagonist, stated that he had to make sure to correct them. Recalling the damage, tears and deaths of his loved ones, he said it was to make sure no one else suffered from their atrocities. Conducting a dense attack with wind and pushing back his opponent, the protagonist declared that he would thoroughly cleanse his lands. Dark blood fell to the ground as the man laughed. The bloodied guy, raising his head and smiling slightly madly, asked if he really thought it was possible. Looking at the crippled man, the protagonist stated that he knows that sometimes he makes mistakes, but he knows one thing for sure. He, approaching the kneeling man, ended his sentence by saying that even Jared was better than him. The man's face showed genuine rage. Jared plunged the silver blade into his leg. The protagonist, holding a blade in the body of a man screaming in pain, stated that this would calm him down. Hanging his bleeding head, the bald man asked if he thought everything would end with his death. Smiling, he added that if the general of the knights found out about this, he would bring his knights here and avenge him. The protagonist reached into his pocket. Picking up the green book, the main character asked if he knew what this thing was. The main character began to leaf through the book. As he began to read, he announced that Count Byrox, whom he had spoken about, would not come. Turning in surprise towards the protagonist, the man asked how he knew his name. Still holding the book in his hands, Jared replied that he had spent countless nights on this. These are just ordinary notes about people. Covering his face with a book, the protagonist stated that he learned that they were relatives with that count. He, starting to shake, still not showing his face, asked if he would kill him. Revealing his face, he, looking at his defeated opponent with a murderous gaze, asked if he really thought that the general of the knightly order from the Idema Empire would come to save his nephew. The bloodied man listened to the main character. Jared stated that he was talking about traveling 5,000 kilometers, crossing 4 kingdoms. It is simply impossible to cross so many territories. Continuing to stare blankly into the bald man's eyes, the protagonist asked if this meant that he would grieve over the death of his nephew and do everything possible to avenge him. The man turned pale at the words of his enemy. The main character stated that he would not do this. For such a power-hungry person like him, such a nephew was just a thorn in the side. On the ground not far from them lay a red flag with a white symbol. Jared asked if anyone would even grieve for him. The man's world narrowed down to a protagonist who told him things that destroyed him from the inside. The protagonist said that no, they would simply be relieved by his death. Smiling mockingly, the main character said that this man's life was truly worthless. The main character began to form a spinning white ball of energy. He said he was much more prepared than he was, so he shouldn't worry. A powerful white and blue barrier covered the space surrounding them. The lost man lowered his head. Jared asked him what his last words were, stating that he would give them to him. The bald man's opened eye lit up. He pulled out a knife from his leg and rushed at the protagonist with a scream. The main character, holding out his palm, directed some of the magic surrounding them towards the man. In pain, he continued to hold the blade. His body was taking enormous damage. He screamed in pain, unable to attack anymore. He froze, surrounded by the magic of the main character. Touching his nose and beginning to freeze it completely, the protagonist declared that he would listen to him in the next world. The man's body was covered with ice. It slowly began to crumble into small particles of snow. The protagonist, surrounded by snowflakes, moved his hand away from the dead man. A system alert appeared, indicating that the first successful defense task had been completed. The protagonist received 50 charms as a reward. The value of his territory increased by 50%, regardless of the state of internal affairs. The main character, sitting down on the ground, exhaled with relief. The knight standing 10 meters away looked at him. He turned his head in their direction with displeasure. Immediately raising their hands, they together declared that they were giving up. Several men, who had the best armor, walked near the Malakron soldiers who were waiting their turn. The remaining Malakron soldiers had their armor removed and finally surrendered. It was an easy victory. The protagonist put on glasses. He pulled a hood over his head and walked behind a soldier with a red and yellow helmet. Jared didn't get carried away by his victory, but disguised himself as a mal or cannon moved on. Hundreds of soldiers entered the tall wooden gates. From the very beginning, the protagonist had only one goal. The main character, riding a horse together with other soldiers, was catching up with the enemy warrior. He planned to take Majorca and Ranella into his own hands. He, along with his best warriors, stood over a group of bowed knights of Majorca. As a result, Majorca fell. The flag with a yellow star on a green background was raised. Then the leader of Majorca changed in one day. The protagonist assessed the stats of his country. Agriculture 50 out of 75, business 96 out of 501, science 75, loyalty 200 out of 300. The main character, putting his fingers to his chin, thought that Cribia is no longer a subordinate country, even though it is called weak. The dark-haired man approached Jared and asked him what he was going to do. Raising his hand, he declared that Ranella had no fortresses left, and their troops were destroyed. He noted that he did not think that they would be able to defend themselves. Putting his hand on his belt, the protagonist, who got up from his chair, said that this is so, and for starters, the battle between armies comes down to who has more soldiers. Seriously looking at the man, the main character confidently declared that they would go to Ranella. An image of a surprised and slightly upset protagonist appeared. However, Jared's ambitious plan was dashed by the appearance of an unexpected person. Ronella's reception room. Jared sat in front of several people. The brown-haired man, putting his hand forward, declared that now the genius of this war, Horgus, had been killed at the hands of Jared. It was General Capri from the territory of Myceria. Holding out 2 fingers, he noted that he had also captured Majorca. Thus they got rid of the cause of war and have good results. The protagonist, sitting on a luxurious chair, said that he thinks differently. Turning to the side in shock at the man with the sparse mustache who turned away. The protagonist stated that he did not think that only one person was responsible. Clearing his throat, the sweating man turned to Lord Capri. Capri said with a smile that if so, then Lord Ranella should agree to pay compensation. The dark-haired man lowered his head. Lord Capri stated that he, as a peace-loving pacifist, would not like to see the territory of his neighbor consumed by the horror of war. The protagonist's eyes lit up and he said the general's name. While introducing the Ronella and Misuria territories, the protagonist thought that Capri was definitely looking for an opportunity to attack Ronella's territory by putting on a show about being peaceful. The brown-haired man asked the second one if he agreed. The dark-haired man kneeling said yes, forming a sphere of air between his hands. Jared stated that he disagreed. He released a stream of energy, putting both hands forward and used an ice storm. Making a hand gesture, he created orange arrows near him. They headed towards his previous attack with lightning speed. Lowering his hands, he began to form fire. A huge explosion destroyed the room following the use of a fireball. A 10-meter column of smoke was raised after the protagonist's attack. Capri ran out of the smoke, grabbing his blade. Having flown through the protagonist, he stabbed him in the stomach with a sword. The main character, closing his eyes, thought that he needed to calm down. He mentally noted that he was facing a rank B Tang. Magic would not harm him in any way. He is the leader of the Central Territories, having an army twice the size of Cribia's. A cold look appeared on Capri's face, and he asked if Jared agreed. Lowering his head, the main character, sitting calmly on a chair, made a mental decision that it was pointless to engage in battle with him. The protagonist replied that he understood. Looking at the main character with a smile, the Lord declared that he was right and a kind-hearted guy. Closing his eyes, the protagonist sadly mentally noted that, in addition, if he wants to move from north to south, he will have to go through Misuria. Looking angrily at Lord Capri, the protagonist mentally declared that he would kill him. An image of a map appeared that described the characteristics of Capri. It depicted a lord holding a red sword. He was level 61. His shield bash was at level A. Strong skin as well, anti-magic beat, approximation, diplomacy, checks and balances were also listed in his characteristics. He had an artifact invader artifact armor of Daita. The cloudy night sky was over the white estate building. The yellow-haired girl was sleeping soundly in her bed. Some of the wine spilled out when the glass was actively rotated. A red-haired girl with glasses, calmly drinking wine at the table, declared that this was the best time of the day. Raising the glass to her face, she turned to the right. Ella, looking at Sabio, asked what she was doing here so late. Rubbing her neck, the girl replied that she just wanted to get some fresh air. The blonde girl sat down at the table. Ella excitedly stated that she had been somewhat absent-minded all day. She also asked if it was the war that affected her so much. Lowering her head slightly and looking down, Sabio replied that she had not, and said that the reason was that she was simply thinking about why Lord Jared had not asked Ella for help. The girl said with a smile that he probably just didn't want guests to defend his house. She also said that he only invited her to teach Lena. The blonde girl, looking uncertainly in her direction, said that Cribia was about to be captured by enemies. Closing her eyes and starting to drink wine, Ella stated that if you look at the results, it seems that Lord Jared has been preparing for this for a long time. Placing her hands on her knees, the white-haired girl noted that she felt this when they first met. She also stated that she felt like he was seeing into the future. An image of a girl with two swords appeared standing in front of the protagonist. Sabio said she had many chances to talk to him during her vacation. The girl also noted that he asked if she was okay. The main character, looking at the girl with kind eyes, stated that since most elves are better off staying in their safe territories. The white-haired girl, calmly looking ahead, said that Jared asked why she toiled in this dirty world. She stated that he knew everything. An image of a bloody monster with glowing yellow eyes appeared. Sevio said that he knew about the terrible end her father met at the hands of the Black Orcs. Looking back at the girl, Ella asked if not only Grey Elves know about this. She noted that she only knew because she told her. The girl sitting on a blue chair and turning her head to the right stated that the protagonist even gave her advice, recommended that she look for more than just revenge. Lowering her head, she added that he advised her to also look at the big picture. Raising her hands, the girl declared that he was quite an interesting person and asked how he knew all this. Holding her hands together, Sabio stated that she would like to know too. Getting up and moving away from the table, Ella said that if the girl was interested, then she could follow him. She noted that they will still be on the territory of Cribia for a long time. Closing her eyes, the white-haired girl agreed with the statement. Stopping, the red-haired girl, holding a bottle of wine, said to tell her when she starts to feel something. Sabio trembled in surprise. Blushing with embarrassment, the girl said that she was doing it again as Ella danced away. She said that she wanted to ask if he also wanted a glass of wine. The embarrassed girl called out to her teacher, exhaling intensely. The white-haired girl stated that this is why freedom is so good and why there are so many dirty rumors about it. Back alley in Mallorca, several small, unlit houses stood on an empty street. A glass bottle was broken amid shouts that Horgus was an idiot. Frobel, holding out his hand with anger on his face, declared that he had taken so many soldiers while being defeated. He also managed to die. A masked man was taking several bags of gold. Another was sorting through bags of drugs. The head of the drug gang said he couldn't believe he spent so much money on him. Getting up from his chair and walking forward, the white-haired man told people to collect money for all important things now. He also stated that they were leaving Majorca with his hands in his coat pockets. Froe stated as he walked outside that their trade routes were being guarded, so they would just have to prepare for the future when they came to Ronella. A stunned man in a dark cloak and mask told the captain to turn to the left. Closing his eyes and raising his head, the white-haired man declared that the main character was fast. The protagonist, along with a dozen of his soldiers, greeted the head of the drug cartel. The protagonist's eyes began to glow red. He mockingly asked where the man was in such a hurry. Adjusting the chain around his neck, Froy announced that he was moving due to a new job. Red system alerts appeared, indicating the parameters of the white-haired man. He was level 51, and his main traits were a rank recklessness, escape, and rage. He owns the 3rd level tier of Mahart artifact, as well as a space-bending clock. Opening the small silver watch, the head of the drug cartel said that he had no time for jokes. Directing several concentrated balls of energy at the man, the protagonist noted that he was also busy killing him in his guise. The white-haired man closed his eyes and waited for the approaching attack. He gritted his teeth and said that the protagonist was a big pain in the ass for him. The clock mechanism began to rotate, and a bright light came from it. The artifact has been activated. A huge transparent dome instantly covered part of the street. Froi used a space-bending clock. Several of the main characters' attacks approached the man. The moment after activating the ability, they immediately began to slow down. In front of his face, the balls of energy located in the dome stopped. Lackeys, standing next to Jared, noted with surprise on his face that the magic had stopped, and asked if Froley was a magician. The protagonist, looking at the frozen white spheres, stated that this is the effect that his artifact has. It can stop magic 20 meters away from him. Coldly assessing the enemy, the main character thought that the artifact did not work on 5th grade magic. Looking at the white-haired man standing nearby, the protagonist mentally declared that he was still in 4th grade, approaching the transparent ability barrier. Jared mentally said that, like it or not, he had to be within 20 meters to land a strong blow. The protagonist entered the barrier. Looking at the approaching yellow-haired guy, Froze asked if he wanted to say that he, the magician, would fight him up close. Stopping, the main character with a serious face declared that the head of the notorious drug cartel had come to an end. Smirking, the white-haired man asked if he was tired since he was trying to catch him right after the war ended. Placing the fingers of one hand in a circle, Freud said to forget about it and get on with business. Raising his head with a mad smile, the white-haired man declared that he would give him twice as much money as he gave to Horgus. He corrected himself and said that he would give 3 times if the main character closed his eyes to them. Several cloaked men grabbed their weapons. The head of the drug cartel said that he did not want to joke about the war with the new lord on their territory. Gritting his teeth in anger, Lack is asked how he dared say such a thing. Seriously looking ahead, the protagonist thought that if he let him go now, then the northern region of the Nas continent would be under the control of Dutragio. He introduced a blonde girl in a dark suit who smiled confidently. He mentally declared that in the future Lana would be known as an impenetrable wall. An image of a blonde-haired man appeared wearing a gold mask on his face and a gold jewelry with rubies on his neck. He mentally noted that Froy would be known as the right hand of that tyrant, the advisor of the Demon King. Raising his hand and placing the fingers of his other hand in his sleeve, the protagonist declared that they must kill people like him in order to maintain the nobility of Majorca as a new territory. Taking out his saber, the man asserted that negotiations were impossible. Light came from the watch of the head of the drug cartel. He asked if Akron's beating had gone to his head. With rage on his face, he declared that childhood time was already over, and now he would put him to bed. Revealing a golden necklace with dark symbols on his wrist, the protagonist prepared to use the ability. After he clenched his hand into a fist, a system window appeared in front of him. There was information that if his level is lower than that of the enemy, then his strength and wisdom are doubled. The conditions were met, so the 5th option of the Delic bracelet was activated. The golden bracelet began to become covered with dark magic. The protagonist said that according to the 5th option, his strength and wisdom are doubled. Frawa, standing in a stance and preparing to attack, looked at the lightning that came from the protagonist. Dark purple lightning bolts were coming off the guy's bracelet. The main character asked with a grin if the man was ready to sleep sweetly. It was a nightmare ability. Empty houses of the same type stood densely on an empty street. Lackeys, along with other soldiers, engaged in sword fighting. Jumping up, the protagonist fired several magical projectiles. The head of the drug portal, making a dash forward, dodged the attack. Clenching his blade, he used the 1st level fugitive ability. Making quick attacks with his blade, he cut through the remaining balls of ice energy of the protagonist. He used the Sword of Speed. Stepping onto the ground, he made another jerk. Approaching the main character, he extended his hand forward. A knight in silver armor appeared in front of his face, holding his green shield forward and declaring that he would not allow him to injure his lord. Worried, the protagonist, nervously moving his fingers, shouted that the guy should not come near him because he was dangerous. The white-haired man launched a powerful saber attack on the shield. The warrior, who did not have time to react, looked at his cut shield. Frokai jumped, pushing off his head. He flew up to the main character who had soared into the air. With the palm of his left hand facing forward, Jared used the flash. The head of the drug cartel shielded his hand from the bright light. After recovering and removing his hand, he saw several concentrated spheres of ice energy right in front of his face. Several of his warriors fought with the protagonist's squad. The white-haired man landed in the alley. Lowering his sword and looking up, he mentally asked what kind of magician he was. While levitating, the protagonist held his hand near his chest. The man mentally noted that even though the main character is a magician, he knows how to react to hand-to-hand combat. Clutching a piece of his leather jacket, Froy mentally noted that his magical power was ridiculously fast. Spitting out blood, the man thought that Jared might actually be a 5th-level magician, not a 4th. Looking forward and imagining his white-haired acquaintance, the head of the drug cartel mentally stated that it was like fighting 4 Acrons at the same time. Applauding sarcastically, the protagonist stated that he was able to see his abilities since he was able to cut the shield. Looking down with a smile, he stated that it was obvious because the man was a master of the sword. The man looked at the guy in surprise. The main character noted that the strangest thing is that he does not feel his artifacts. The protagonist asked about the black light coming from the sword because it was created to fight magic. Froga's inserted saber emitted a dark purple light. It was Moisel, the 99th level 1 failure sword. His first ability is an anti-magic sword designed to combat magic. The protagonist began to walk on the ground. The main character stated that he suspects that the leader carries this sword with him because he is too weak. The veins on the white-haired man's forehead bulged with anger. The protagonist stated that he expected more from him. Gritting his teeth, Froshi asked if Jared had used such a weapon before. With his arms outstretched, the protagonist asked with a grin if it was true. He also noted that he sees that the spatial distortion clock is just a decoration during the battle within a radius of 20 meters. The clothes on the man's hands were torn. He screamed with genuine rage for the protagonist to shut up. He used the fugitive ability, level 2. Instantly closing the distance, the head of the drug cartel put his blade forward, trying to attack the main character. The protagonist calmly jumped back. He flew away from the man who was trying to strike again with his blade. Extending his palm, he created a large fireball. With fury in his eyes, the white-haired man cut through his opponent's attack. He used the Sword of Speed. Looking ahead, he saw Jared quickly flying to another street. The protagonist, pushing off the walls, quickly increased his advantage in distance. As Frotsk approached him, he spread his arms and used an ice attack against the walls. Large pieces of the stone wall began to fall on the head of the drug cartel. The man dodging the attack began to use them to push off and close the distance. Flying between large stones, he swung his blade. The protagonist was flying in front of him. The main character, sensing the attack, turned around in surprise. The white-haired man instantly launched an arcing attack with his blade. Looking ahead, he saw only Jared's green cloak. There was genuine surprise in his eyes. He thought about avoiding it before cutting, but how could he avoid the blink? Flying over the building, the protagonist stated that the man's speed was truly frightening, and said that he even had to use a spell. With a confident smile forming a dense purple-white ball from which black lightning came out, the main character announced that it was his turn. Furuichi looked at Jared's ability. The protagonist used the lightning ability and Night Awakening. Purple lightning struck from the sky. A column of smoke rose at the sight of her impact. The kneeling man sighed, releasing a bit of lightning. Sitting on the old roof of the house, the main character told him to give up. He also noted that if they only fought with swords, he would definitely not be an easy opponent. Looking at the crippled Froy, who was trying to stand up, leaning on his blade, the protagonist stated that he was much faster than any swordsman. At the same time, each of his blows was powerful. Looking down and imagining the enemy's attack zone, the protagonist stated that he was not entering his attack zone. Smirking, still barely able to stand the head of the drug cartel, said that the main character was good at analysis. Spreading his arms to the sides, he began to emit red energy. A red aura covered his entire body and went upward in a column. He used the ability Fugitive Level 3. His face became covered with veins with a mad smile and an inadequate look. He said that since the protagonist is so good at analysis, then let him try to guess who will win this battle. Putting his head on his hand, the main character with a confident expression on his face said that he was 100% sure that he would get it. The man's aura grew even more, and inhuman rage was reflected on his face. He shouted for the protagonist to try not to die. He said he would shut him up. He used a level for a fugitive. Crouching, he prepared to lunge. The ground under Freud's feet crumbled in an instant. The frightened protagonist looked at the man. The red-faced head of the drug cartel threw his saber forward. She pierced Jared's body. A cry of pain echoed through the dark city. Froppy trembled with his own blade in his body. The protagonist looked at him in surprise. Smirking evilly, the protagonist asked if the white-haired man realized that he didn't care. The main character, comparing Delac and Prua, thought that despite the fact that both are strong enemies, they could not be more different. He noted that the leek's body, partially covered by magic, was slowly decomposing, which made him weak. At this time, the second opponent, possessing the artifact, had an advantage and was at the height of his power. Jared thought that he could dodge the already familiar attack of the ice and slowly reduce its health with the help of magic, but such a strategy was not very suitable for the enemies of Prua and Capri, who were capable of killing the young lord with just one blow if he let his guard down. While Jared was in thought, he smiled joyfully, discovering Prewa's special ability, which was the so-called recklessness. The head of the drug cartel looked worriedly to the side, clutching an artifact in his hand. With the help of the recklessness ability, one could increase one's physical abilities many times over in a short time, which was an ideal solution for the main character. Now the cunning blonde was taunting the opponent with the artifact so that he would finally hurry up with recklessness. Pruill only furrowed his eyebrows angrily while the young man heard him more and more with caustic phrases. At one point, the head of the drug cartel could not stand it and yelled at Jared, furiously waving his weapon. After Pruill was in the grip of recklessness, he rushed to attack the enemy with a dagger. Then the blonde used space magic to hit the man with his own blade, baring his teeth impaled by his own weapon. The drug dealer began to shake with rage, realizing that he had made a serious mistake. Jared looked at his wounded enemy with bewilderment, wondering if he had heard about keeping cool, but remembering to be kind. The blonde man held up a bag of white powder, menacingly declaring that many people had died because of the drugs Pruill was selling. The contents fell out of the hole in the bag, while the main character said that only those who did not have money gave up on this. After these words, he shoved the powder into the mouth of the resisting enemy, noting that it was a parting gift. Jared stubbornly held his hand to the man's mouth, reminding the drug cartel leader how proud his gang was of what they sold. The blonde removed his hand only at the moment when thick foam came out of the reddened Prutom's mouth, and he began to fall back. The Lord said menacingly that his opponent, who had fallen to his knees, would be beheaded for an unforgivable crime. After the monologue, 3 small notifications from the system appeared in the air, informing about the completion of the Tiger Hunt quest, the restoration of public order, and the continuation of human deaths if the causes of the previous ones are not established. Meanwhile, in the settlement there was a fierce battle between an armed knightly detachment and a criminal group. Clenching his fist, the chief of public order confidently reported to my lord that they had suppressed the rebels. The soldiers, raising their heads, watched Jared soaring in the sky, who stated that even if Prue led the most famous squad, this did not mean that other criminal gangs in the country had stopped operating. Directing his blue eyes at his subordinates, the Lord firmly decided that the troops would clear everything before dawn. The young man ordered the knights not to leave alive the bandits who opposed him. He imagined how captured and chained criminals were led to hard labor, demanding that the soldiers cut off the heads of the rebels. The houses of the settlement were illuminated by the rays of the sun as morning began to come. The head of public order, looking tired, wiped the sweat from his face. Then he raised his head with a frown, thinking about my lord. Watching the blonde soaring in the air, lackeys mentally concluded that he always surpassed insurmountable obstacles with mysterious wisdom. People hesitantly pulled back the curtains, looking out of the windows in fear, while the knight thought that his master had now abandoned informed decisions. The onlooker stood on the street watching what was happening, and the chief at that time concluded that my lord had shown a sharp and spontaneous nature. The townspeople stood in the town square during dawn. Impressed by Jared's actions, the blonde blocking the sun himself now appeared in the image of a rising emperor. Lackeys illuminated by the soft light watched his master with undisguised amazement. A notification appeared indicating that the knight's devotion had increased greatly. A tablet framed in gold also appeared, which stated that lackeys would reach the first level of awakening when his devotion rose to 200 units. The action moves to a place with a pile of papers where the Lord of Education of Magorka was now staying. A hand reached up from the piles of sheets, and the young man concluded that this space personifies complete disorder and chaos. Jared stared with exhaustion at the documents scattered everywhere, declaring that there was no time to bother with them now. Looking carefully at some of the papers, the blonde thought that there were 2 things he had to do. The first of them was to run around ancient tombs to accumulate more power. The second important thing was to find a highly qualified specialist capable of extracting an underground resource called caldium. It refers to a very difficult to extract or stronger than iron, which will not be found until 13 years later. The main character decided that if his subordinates get to Chaldea first, they will be able to make a great breakthrough in weapons that will be very strong. The blonde man hung his arms over a table littered with stacks of papers, desperately wondering what he should do with all this numerous work. Then Jared's eyes snapped open, remembering when he first arrived in Caribbean. Then the plump protagonist, who was trying to sort out paperwork, was happily helped by Hayes. Looking at the documents with a smile, the young man concluded that he would see the girl again. On one of the sheets there was an advertisement seeking special talents on Gorka, who could help in governing the territory. Putting on the 3D glasses, Jared lounged around with popcorn and a drink, as if he had come to watch a movie. The first candidate was Tonio, who was able to cope with any political matter that would bring reform to the country. Holding up a sign with a circle of approval, the Lord enthusiastically announced that he was in support of the man. However, suddenly a red stamp appeared on Tonio's dossier because the main character remembered that the candidate was executed when he was an advisor to